If they're not offering you any money without you asking, you chose the wrong target. Um, they should be giving you these. They should be slipping these in your purse right here, your little envelope full of cash. They should have this in their pocket. And when you meet them, hi baby, you give them a hug. They're supposed to take this out their pocket. Here, this is for you. Put this in your purse. If you don't see one of these by 2 or 3, date 2 or 3, it's time to go. Okay? Waste of time. They think you regular. You said that's what strippers do? Well, you can't have strippers without men. Without men with cash. No supply without the demand, baby.
This video is way overdue. I was actually going to make it right after the 304 mindset video as a continuation because it belongs in the same conversation. Even though the sprinkle movement has exploded online as dating advice, at its core, it's still about tricking. Let's just be honest. If you haven't watched this video yet, I'll link it in the description box below because it provides important context for today's discussion. We have a lot to cover, so let's get into it. Actually, before I continue, I want to give a quick disclaimer because people are very emotional these days, both men and women. It must be that atrazine in the water messing everybody's hormones. When it comes to any online personality, whether male or female, if you are publicly teaching, preaching, or promoting an ideology, then you are automatically placing yourself in a position to be questioned by the public. And that is what this video is. A questioning of the ideology being presented. Like I said in my previous video, do not get emotional. Be analytical. Pay attention to what is being said, what is being promoted, and what the consequences of that mindset actually are. For those unfamiliar, Letitia Padua, better known online as Shera7 or a Shera Star Goddess, is an American YouTuber, live streamer, and social media personality best known for her dating advice aimed at women. Her content focuses heavily on dating wealthy men, financial provision in relationships, and what she calls the sprinkle philosophy. Shera gained widespread attention after clips from her live streams went viral on TikTok in 2023, earning her the nickname the Sprinkle Lady after her signature catchphrase. While many viewers praise her content for its humor and entertainment value, critics have described her dating philosophy as controversial, with some labeling it nihilistic, Machiavellian, and even regressive in its approach to modern relationships. I first started watching Shera's spiritual channel, A Shera Star Goddess, when I was heavily immersed in the occult. I will say this, she is very knowledgeable in that area and clearly well-versed in many occult concepts. As a result, I ended up watching some of her sprinkle content as well. However, I never fully bought into it because a lot of it seemed unrealistic to me. Some of the advice just didn't make logical sense when applied to real life. That said, I can absolutely understand why so many people enjoy her content. Shera is funny, charismatic, and highly entertaining. I think that's a big part of why her message resonates with so many people.
You said men today want to get chased. Okay, call the police on men. What are y'all talking about? Body count again? Who cares, sir? How many men have your mama slept with? Once this man told you that you should take down his number, I told him no thank you, but why do they approach and suggest we contact them? I could take down your credit card number, sir. Let me get that. What does it mean if a man says he likes a somewhat submissive woman? And say, I like a somewhat wealthy man. Can you reach out to a guy first and make him more interested later? Reaching out to touch a stranger, and they say, why? Tell him that it's pick-me nature. Why did you do it that way? Unless he owe you some money. Unless he owe you some money, ma'am. Sprinkle.
And look, I have to be fair here. Shera is funny. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise. Every now and then she'll pop up on my feed, say something completely outrageous, and I'll laugh. Part of her appeal is that she's genuinely entertaining. She has charisma, sharp delivery, great timing, and she knows exactly how to capture people's attention. I don't hate Shera. In fact, I think one of the reasons she's been so successful is because she packages controversial ideas with humor. People often come for the jokes and stay for the philosophy. My disagreement has never been with her ability to entertain an audience. My disagreement is with some of the conclusions people draw from her content, and the extent to which they build their lives around those ideas. Those are two different conversations. You can appreciate someone's wit, intelligence, and entertainment value while still critically examining the worldview they're promoting. In fact, I would argue that's exactly what mature adults should do. So no, this isn't a hate video. It's not a personal attack. It's an analysis of an ideology and the psychological effects that ideology can have when adopted uncritically. Because some ideas can be entertaining and influential at the same time, and those are often the ideas most worth examining.
If a man doesn't want to spend money on you, then you need to let it be known that you don't spend time with men who don't spend money, because you are a priority. I only like men who spend money on me. I only like generous men. I only like men that want to spoil me. This is your standard. Whenever a guy comes up to you, act like they can't compete with this perfect man that you have as your standard. You got to make them spend money first, which means not just on dinners. Those things don't count. Dinner don't count. Dinner is trash. And I'm going to tell you, unless you're hungry and his name is listed under dinner in your phone, dinner does not count towards him spending money. Things that you actually want counts. Bills, shopping, jewelry, giving you money to start a business. Those are the types of things that count. You need him to give you money, not spend money on food that he sits there and eats with you. That does not count. That's impressive if you like nice restaurants, but it doesn't count towards getting money, because if you're not leaving with anything. You see? So start setting them up from the start to get them to give you things, to gift you, to pay bills, and to do all those things. It won't fizzle out if they've invested. Okay? Or at least it won't fizzle out as quick. Should you play dumb? And yeah, always play dumb. Not too dumb, but just play dumb. Oh man, cheat. Just get their money. Why y'all asking me dumb questions? Oh man, cheat. Just get their money. Eventually, they will all cheat.
One of the fundamental problems with the way many women consume Shera 7's content is that they assume they can successfully adopt her psychological framework without first understanding the personality structure from which that framework originates. They cannot. And I don't mean that as a criticism. I mean it as an observation about human behavior. I want to be careful with my language because I am not interested in armchair diagnoses. However, it is difficult to listen to Shera for any significant period of time without noticing that she approaches relationships through a lens that is highly pragmatic, transactional, and emotionally insulated. For her audience, this detachment is often interpreted as strength. I am not convinced that those two things are synonymous. Psychologically speaking, emotional detachment can emerge from many different places. It can be the result of wisdom and experience. It can be a coping mechanism developed after repeated disappointments. It can be self-protection. It can be adaptation. And sometimes it can simply reflect an individual's natural disposition. Whatever the source may be, the average woman listening to Shera does not appear to share that disposition. In fact, many women who are attracted to her content seem to be carrying significant relational wounds. They have experienced betrayal, abandonment, infidelity, manipulation, or chronic disappointment. Consequently, they find relief in a worldview that promises immunity from future pain. The appeal is understandable. If love has repeatedly hurt you, a philosophy that minimizes emotional investment can feel like freedom. But there is a critical distinction between healing from pain and organizing your entire life around the avoidance of pain. The former produces growth, the latter produces fear. Many of the principles promoted within the Sprinkle framework function as defensive adaptations. Always have a backup plan, never become too emotionally attached, never trust completely, always ensure you benefit from the exchange. Viewed psychologically, these strategies are less about intimacy and more about risk management. The problem is that relationships are not merely economic exchanges, they are attachment systems.
I tend to not involve myself in gender wars discourse because it's always so black and white and non-constructive, but the amount of that sprinkle content I've been seeing on my For You page has been legitimately chilling. So let me hopefully de-influence you. First of all, it's not empowering to change yourself, to make yourself more calculated and cold and heartless just to enter a relationship with someone you never respected in the first place. If you actually believe all men are the worst, you will find no utility in a relationship with one. It's not worth changing yourself to have access to labor and resource value because that's something that only men can offer. Second of all, if you want to tout false bioessentialist claims as to why all men are evil and cheat, that's your prerogative, but realize that you are contributing to messaging that will groom future generations of men to act in alignment with it. And that's not me blaming women for male behavior. But it shouldn't be the women's responsibility to mitigate their response to oppression. Right, and when you absolve women of all accountability, you also make it seem like we're inactive and passive participants of our own life and thus the world. Whatever, okay, two, you are also contributing to your own self-fulfilling prophecy. Listen, I understand the protective mechanism of this sprinkle mindset. Lord knows I also thought the same for a period of time. But when you interface with this world with the intention intention of avoiding pain or hurt. You begin to appraise anything as a threat. Genuinely well-intentioned, benevolent actions can be discarded as something malicious, something meant to manipulate you. As we humans tend to do, you'll act to maintain your self-preservation mindset and therefore deem anyone who is legitimately a good person to be inauthentic. And let me tell you right now, it is not worth it. It's a disservice to you and your human experience to rob yourself of the opportunity to bond, to feel, to connect. And all for what? Like a faux sense of control in this black and white thinking? Oh my God, it's not worth it.
Human beings form emotional bonds. They experience trust, vulnerability, dependency, affection, grief, disappointment, and repair. Attempting to eliminate these realities does not make someone emotionally evolved. It simply changes the way they manage anxiety. What concerns me is that many women mistake emotional distancing for emotional mastery. They are not the same thing. Emotional mastery is the capacity to remain open while tolerating uncertainty. Emotional distancing is the attempt to eliminate uncertainty by reducing emotional investment. One requires courage, the other primarily requires control. The psychologically mature response to the possibility of betrayal is not to assume that everyone will betray you, nor is it to avoid vulnerability altogether. It is to develop confidence in your ability to recover should betrayal occur. That is resilience. Resilience is the belief that pain, while unpleasant, is survivable. It is the understanding that heartbreak is not annihilation. Rejection is not annihilation. Divorce is not annihilation. Disappointment is not annihilation. A resilient person does not require guarantees before they engage with life. They trust their capacity to adapt. This is where I fundamentally diverge from much of the relationship advice that dominates social media. I would argue that this same rhetoric has increasingly permeated discussions surrounding female friendships as well, often with similarly damaging consequences. We are constantly told to assume betrayal, expect jealousy, anticipate hidden agendas, and view every relationship through the lens of suspicion. While discernment is important, a worldview built entirely on distrust does not produce wisdom. It produces isolation. When people begin approaching all relationships as potential threats rather than potential sources of connection, they may protect themselves from disappointment, but they also deprive themselves of the very experiences that make life meaningful. In fact, I've largely stopped consuming that type of content because I noticed it was beginning to negatively affect both my mental health and my relationships with other women. When you spend enough time listening to people tell you that everyone is jealous, everyone is secretly competing with you, and everyone has ulterior motives, you eventually start viewing the world through that lens. Because eventually, if you spend enough time looking for enemies, you'll start finding them everywhere. Scripture tells us in Proverbs 4:23, "Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life." In other words, what you continually feed your mind and heart will eventually shape how you perceive the world around you. There's a difference between discernment and suspicion. Discernment helps you identify unhealthy people. Suspicion convinces you that everyone is unhealthy. And I think social media has become very good at selling suspicion as wisdom. This is why Philippians 4:8 instructs believers to think on whatever is true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and of good report. What we repeatedly consume shapes the way we interpret reality. As I said, discernment helps you recognize unhealthy people. Fear convinces you that everyone is unhealthy. Those are not the same thing. A healthy mind is capable of recognizing danger without becoming consumed by it. I'll be making a separate video on female friendships soon because I believe it's a conversation that deserves its own discussion. However, I also think it fits within this broader conversation because the sprinkle mindset ultimately teaches people to extract without investing. At its core, that mindset is often rooted in an inability or an unwillingness to tolerate the possibility that a relationship may not work out. It encourages individuals to maximize what they can receive while minimizing vulnerability, emotional risk, and reciprocity. When a person becomes primarily focused on protecting themselves from loss, they can gradually begin viewing every relationship through the lens of risk management rather than human connection. At its core, the fear that all men will inevitably betray you is not fundamentally different from the fear that all women are secretly jealous of you. Both are attempts to cope with uncertainty by assuming the worst about other people. Both encourage hypervigilance, and both can lead to the same destination: emotional isolation. You may believe you're protecting yourself, but what you're often building is a fortress. The problem with fortresses is that they keep danger out, but they also keep intimacy out. They prevent betrayal, but they also prevent connection. A life organized around fear is not a life lived fully. It is a life spent managing threats that may never come, while missing opportunities for love, friendship, trust, and genuine human connection. The goal should not be to become untouchable. The goal should be to become resilient enough that you can engage with life fully, knowing that if disappointment comes, you have the strength to recover. I do not believe the goal of life is to become invulnerable. I do not believe the goal of life is to eliminate every possibility of emotional pain, and I certainly do not believe that cynicism should be confused with wisdom. Yet social media increasingly rewards precisely that mindset. Suspicion is interpreted as intelligence, distrust is interpreted as discernment, emotional withdrawal is interpreted as strength. But a worldview built upon perpetual suspicion inevitably creates the very isolation it claims to protect against, A person cannot experience deep connection while simultaneously treating every relationship as a potential threat. At some point, self-protection becomes self-confinement. In my view, genuine psychological health requires something far more difficult than detachment. It requires the willingness to remain hopeful without becoming naive, trusting without becoming reckless, and open without becoming dependent. That balance is not achieved through emotional withdrawal. It is achieved through the development of a strong internal foundation. The healthiest people are not those who believe nothing can hurt them. The healthiest people are those who know that if something does hurt them, they will survive it. That distinction changes everything. Before I continue, I want to take a moment to thank my male subscribers, because I know these are the types of videos you're going to tune into. Men are usually curious to hear women speak honestly about modern dating culture, relationship dynamics, and the messages being promoted online. And congratulations, you are now the leading demographic on this channel. When this channel first started, men made up roughly 10% of my audience. Over the past several months, that number has steadily increased to 30 to 40%, and now you account for over half of my viewership. Based on my analytics, there are officially more men watching this channel than women. The funny part is that if you looked at the comment section, you would never know it. You guys operate like ghosts. No likes, no comments, no hype, no engagement. Just quietly watching from the shadows and then disappearing until the next upload. And I have to say, as a female creator, it's not easy to capture male attention, let alone keep it. Men are generally much more selective with the content they consume, and they're far less likely to engage publicly than women are. So the fact that so many of you keep coming back video after video genuinely means a lot to me. That said, if you're part of this silent majority, it's time to come out of witness protection. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, share the videos, drop a comment every now and then. You don't have to write an essay, just let me know you're here. The reality is that engagement is what helps a channel grow, and if you believe these conversations are valuable, then helping the content reach more people is one of the easiest ways to support it. You've already shown up as viewers. Now it's time to show up as a community. What's also interesting is that I have lost female subscribers over the months after posting videos critiquing figures such as Wizard Liz, Cardi B, Megan Thee Stallion, and others. Some women leave because they assume criticism means hostility. What they don't understand is that many of those videos were made out of concern, not contempt. I don't create content simply to criticize personalities. I create content because this channel, at its core, is about discernment. It is about identifying the ideas, belief systems, and cultural narratives that shape people's decisions and ultimately shape their lives. And whether people want to admit it or not, one of the greatest blessings or one of the greatest sources of suffering a woman will experience in her lifetime is her relationship with men. The person you choose to marry, build with, have children with, trust, or attach yourself to can dramatically alter the trajectory of your life. A wise decision can bring stability, growth, protection, companionship, and purpose. A poor decision can create years, sometimes decades, of emotional, financial, and spiritual consequences. What concerns me is that many women want the benefits of relationships while simultaneously rejecting the realities that govern them. They want partnership without compromise, commitment without responsibility, security without trust, intimacy without vulnerability. But human nature does not work that way. For all of our technological advancements and social progress, men and women remain human beings with many of the same fundamental psychological needs they have always had. We still seek connection. We still seek belonging. We still seek respect, admiration, affection, trust, and significance. The packaging changes with every generation, but the underlying dynamics remain remarkably consistent. That doesn't mean people should tolerate unhealthy behavior. It doesn't mean traditions are always correct. It simply means that reality exists whether we acknowledge it or not. And the women who tend to navigate relationships most successfully are not the ones trying to wage war against reality. They are the ones who take the time to understand it. You do not have to like every rule of human nature. You do not have to agree with every aspect of male or female psychology, but ignoring those realities rarely produces good outcomes. My goal is not to teach women how to manipulate men. My goal is to teach women how to understand themselves, understand the world around them, and make wiser decisions, because discernment will take you much further in life than resentment ever will. This is the chart that many men in the manosphere, or so-called red pill community, were gleefully sharing with their audiences. They laughed at women and celebrated projections suggesting that by 2030, a significant percentage of women could be unmarried and child-free. What they conveniently forgot to mention is that relationships are not a one-sided equation. If a large percentage of women remain single, then a large percentage of men will as well. Unless people plan on marrying themselves, the outcome affects both sexes. What fascinates me is how much of the online gender war is really just people projecting their fears, disappointments, insecurities, and unresolved wounds onto one another. Men blame women. Women blame men. Each side points to statistics, social trends, and anecdotes as evidence that the other side is the problem. Meanwhile, one fundamental reality remains unchanged. Human beings are relational creatures. We are wired for connection. We seek companionship, intimacy, belonging, friendship, family, and community. We can pretend otherwise online. We can mock it, rationalize it, and build entire ideologies around avoiding vulnerability. But beneath all the posturing, most people still want someone to share their lives with. That's why I find it strange when people celebrate these statistics. Because if men and women truly did not care about one another, they would simply stop talking about each other. But they can't. Men can't stop talking about women. Women can't stop talking about men. Entire industries, podcasts, books, social media channels, and online communities have been built around discussing, criticizing, analyzing, complaining about, and trying to understand the opposite sex. Why? Because beneath all the frustration, resentment, disappointment, and posturing, the truth is much simpler. Men and women still want each other. In many ways, the obsession itself is evidence of the desire. People do not spend this much time discussing things they are indifferent to. The intensity of the conversation often reveals the intensity of the longing underneath it. For all the online rhetoric about independence, not needing anyone, and opting out of relationships, most people still desire love, companionship, intimacy, partnership, and belonging. The tragedy is that many have become so focused on protecting themselves from one another that they are losing the very thing they were seeking in the first place. Because at the end of the day, despite all the noise, the games, the strategies, and the gender wars, the thing most men want is women, and the thing most women want is men. If you genuinely end up among the growing percentage of permanently single people, is that really the outcome you wanted? Is that truly the vision of success? Or is it simply the byproduct of years spent consuming content that taught you to fear, distrust, resent, and compete with the very people you ultimately hope to build a life with? Because channels that teach women to manipulate men and channels that teach men to manipulate women are not opposites. They are reflections of one another. One tells women to extract resources while giving as little as possible. The other tells men to extract intimacy, attention, or validation while investing as little as possible. Both are rooted in the same assumption. Relationships are battlefields, and the goal is to avoid being the one who loses. But if both sides are trying to outmaneuver each other, who actually wins? At some point, life begins to resemble a chess match rather than a human experience. Every interaction becomes a strategy. Every relationship becomes a negotiation. Every act of kindness is viewed with suspicion. Every expression of affection is analyzed for hidden motives. That is not freedom. That is psychological imprisonment. The irony is that the highest levels of human fulfillment are rarely found in winning against other people. They are found in meaningful connection with other people. There is a reason solitary confinement is considered one of the most severe forms of punishment within prison systems. Human beings are not designed to thrive in prolonged isolation. Research has consistently shown that extreme social isolation can produce anxiety, depression, emotional distress, cognitive decline, and profound psychological suffering. Depriving a person of meaningful human connection is considered punishment precisely because connection is a fundamental human need. Yet many people are voluntarily building emotional versions of solitary confinement for themselves. They are constructing walls so high that nobody can hurt them, but nobody can truly reach them either. And that is the tragedy of much of modern dating culture. In an effort to avoid heartbreak, people are increasingly avoiding attachment. In an effort to avoid disappointment, they are avoiding vulnerability. In an effort to avoid being used, they are avoiding connection. The result is not empowerment, the result is loneliness. The goal of life is not to become untouchable. The goal is to become resilient enough to love, trust, connect, and participate in life despite the risks that come with being human. Because the alternative is spending decades mastering strategies designed to protect yourself from pain, only to arrive at the end of your life wondering whether the walls you built for protection became the very prison that kept you from experiencing love. And before we dive deeper into the topic at hand, I'd like to address something first, and I'm going to say something that may offend both sides, but that's okay. A lot of the dating advice circulating online today, whether it comes from the sprinkle community, the red pill community, or any other group built around manipulation and power dynamics, is operating from a mindset that, from a biblical perspective, is actually witchcraft. Now, before people get emotional, let me explain what I mean. When most people hear the word witchcraft, they immediately think of spells, rituals, candles, crystals, and incantations, but at its core, witchcraft is an attempt to control outcomes and influence people through manipulation rather than through honesty, integrity, and genuine relationship. It's the desire to bend another person's will to serve your own interests. So when someone teaches you how to deceive, manipulate, strategically withhold, play psychological games, manufacture jealousy, exploit vulnerabilities, or create artificial emotional responses in order to get what you want, what exactly is that? It is manipulation. And manipulation is fundamentally a form of control. Many people criticize occult practices while simultaneously engaging in the same underlying behavior in their relationships. They may not be lighting candles or performing rituals, but they are still attempting to control people, engineer outcomes, and secure advantages through deception rather than authenticity. Whether you're a woman trying to manipulate a man for resources, or a man trying to manipulate a woman for sex, attention, validation, or control, the underlying principle is the same. Neither side is morally superior. Both are attempting to gain something from another human being while minimizing honesty, vulnerability, and genuine investment. That's why I find it interesting when men criticize women who follow sprinkle sprinkle content while consuming red pill content that teaches many of the same tactics from the opposite direction. One side calls it strategy, the other side calls it game, but often they're describing different versions of the same behavior. The names change, the spirit behind it does not. Healthy relationships are built on truth, trust, reciprocity, and mutual respect. Manipulative relationships are built on leverage, control, calculation, and hidden agendas. And if your entire dating strategy depends on deceiving, controlling, or psychologically managing another person, then you should seriously ask yourself why honesty alone isn't enough to get the outcome you want. Because love does not require manipulation. Connection does not require manipulation. Only control does. And as for Shera, one thing I will give her credit for is that she has never really hidden who she is. She has been quite open about her spiritual beliefs and the perspectives from which she approaches life and relationships. She's been very open about identifying as a witch, and has never tried to conceal that aspect of her beliefs. Ironically, I find that more honest than some of the content coming from certain corners of the red pill space. At least with Shera, people generally know what they're signing up for. The philosophy is presented openly. The worldview is presented openly. There's very little ambiguity about the lens through which she views relationships. What concerns me more are the creators who package manipulation, emotional games, strategic deception, and power tactics as male empowerment, or woman empowerment, or self-improvement. If your entire strategy revolves around controlling outcomes, manipulating emotions, creating leverage, exploiting insecurities, or gaining power over another person, then changing the branding doesn't change the nature of the behavior. You can call it strategy, you can call it self-protection, but if the goal is still manipulation, then the spirit behind it remains the same. So no, this is not a criticism aimed exclusively at women. Plenty of men are participating in the exact same behaviors while convincing themselves they're somehow different. They aren't. The only difference is the audience they're selling it to. Now let's get back to Shera. We're going to start by analyzing Shera herself, her philosophy, her worldview, and the ideas she's promoting. After that, we're going to examine the real-world outcomes and some of the people who have adopted the sprinkle-sprinkle mindset. We have a lot to cover, so get your snacks, grab your popcorn, and get comfortable. If you need to pause the video and make a coffee, now is the time to do it. This is going to be a long one.
You said, but aren't there some men that don't cheat? Yeah, they in the cemetery. All right, sprinkle.
One thing I've noticed is that when people start speaking in absolutes, it often signals a lack of critical thinking and nuance. Human beings are complex, and reality is rarely as simple as all men are this or all women are that. Intelligent thinking requires the ability to separate personal experience from universal truth. Just because something happened to you repeatedly does not mean it applies to everyone, everywhere, at all times. That is not discernment. That is projection. Have you personally interacted with every man or woman on the planet? Of course not. So where are these conclusions actually coming from? Most of the time, they're coming from personal experience. I've said this before in another video. When a woman says all men cheat, what she's often revealing is that the men she has chosen or encountered have cheated. She is describing her reality, not objective reality. The danger comes when other people absorb that perspective without questioning it. If you're not careful, you'll start internalizing someone else's trauma, disappointment, and bitterness. Before long, you'll begin viewing the world through the lens of experiences that were never even yours. And that's how people become trapped in narratives that limit them. A person who has been hurt repeatedly may develop beliefs that help them make sense of their pain. The problem is that coping mechanisms are not always reliable sources of wisdom. Sometimes they're simply survival strategies. This is one of my broader concerns with much of the relationship content online. People often mistake unresolved wounds for insight. They confuse cynicism with discernment and pessimism with intelligence. But wisdom requires nuance. It requires the ability to acknowledge that some people will betray you without concluding that everyone will betray you. It requires the ability to recognize patterns without turning those patterns into universal laws. Because once you start believing that all members of an entire group are the same, you've stopped observing reality and started defending a narrative. And narratives are powerful because they shape behavior. If you genuinely believe all men are dishonest, you'll approach men differently. If you genuinely believe all women are manipulative, you'll approach women differently. Eventually, your beliefs begin influencing the outcomes you experience. A woman who says, all men cheat, is often speaking from a place of deep hurt. Healed individuals generally do not make blanket statements about entire groups of people based solely on their personal experiences. A healed person can acknowledge that some men cheat without concluding that all men cheat. They can recognize patterns without allowing those patterns to become prejudice.
James had a wife and a girlfriend when I met him. I knew I could get him though. I didn't know when I first met him that he had a wife and a girlfriend. I found out later. But the only reason I stuck around is because I knew they weren't no competition. If I could date someone for 3 months, have him paying all my bills, and he got he was separated, and he's separated and has a girlfriend, and he haven't stopped seeing me yet, then I'm the one. If I could take him, then I can keep him. And I'm not just being confident. He was way older than me, So I calculated that out correctly. I didn't take someone my same age. I didn't take someone who looked better than me. I took someone I knew I was going to be able to keep. And James was separated, not divorced. He might have been going back to his wife. I don't know. But I got him. You snooze, you lose.
Based on Shera's own public statements, she has spoken about becoming involved with James while he was still married, and she has also discussed other people being involved in the situation. Whether people agree with those choices or not, those experiences likely shaped her perspective on relationships. The reality is that we don't know everything that happened within their marriage. Like most public figures, we only see the parts of the story that are shared publicly, while the more difficult or private aspects often remain hidden from view. However, it is reasonable to consider whether some of Shera's views on men, trust, and relationships may have been influenced by her personal experiences. If someone has repeatedly encountered betrayal, deception, relational instability, or even entered a relationship that began with elements of deception, those experiences can profoundly shape the way they view future relationships. That doesn't necessarily mean their conclusions are correct, but it may help explain why they hold them so strongly. We also don't know much about Shera's life before James. For those who may not know, James was her husband, and he passed away from brain cancer in January. They were together for approximately 20 years, which means their relationship began when she was in her mid-20s. What I find interesting is that much of Shera's philosophy about men appears to be rooted in a deeply pessimistic view of relationships, yet from what is publicly known, she spent the overwhelming majority of her adult life with one man and remained married to him until his passing. That naturally raises questions. I'm not claiming to know the answer. None of us do. This is where I think things become more complicated. If James was unfaithful to his wife when Shera met him, then it is fair to ask how much that experience may have influenced her beliefs about men and relationships. After all, our experiences often shape the conclusions we draw about human nature. I actually remember a story Shera shared years ago about how she discovered James was married. If I'm remembering correctly, she described being with him at what she called a hotel, though based on the details she gave, it sounded more like a motel. While he was outside getting the room key, his phone rang. She answered it, and the woman on the other end identified herself as James's wife. I remember hearing that story and finding it striking. Looking back, it raises questions about the foundation of the relationship and the circumstances under which it began. Now, to be clear, none of us know everything that happened. We only know the parts of the story that have been shared publicly. But if one of your earliest experiences with a man involves discovering that he is already married, it would not be surprising if that shaped the way you view trust, fidelity, and relationships moving forward. What I find interesting is that many people listen to Shera's conclusions about men without ever considering where those conclusions may have originated. Beliefs don't appear out of thin air. If the men Shera encountered before James were unfaithful, and if one of her earliest experiences with James involved discovering that he was being unfaithful to another woman, then that would provide a strong foundation for developing a deeply pessimistic view of men and relationships. In fact, it would be difficult not to be affected by experiences like that. When people repeatedly encounter the same negative behavior, they often begin to generalize their experiences into broader conclusions about entire groups of people. What begins as the men I've known have been unfaithful can gradually evolve into men are unfaithful. Psychologically, that is understandable, but understandable and accurate are not necessarily the same thing. This is why it is important to distinguish between conclusions drawn from personal experience and conclusions drawn from objective reality. Our experiences shape us, but they can also limit us if we allow them to become the lens through which we interpret everyone else.
And let me tell y'all why James chose me, because y'all always asking, why did he choose you? Why he could have got a pick-me that was cute, right? Yeah, he could have. And there was plenty of pick-me's that he could have had. And I promise you he could have had them. But guess what? You know why he wanted me? Because I made him look good. Ain't no pick-me can make James look like I can make him look, okay? Everybody thought he was a millionaire when he stepped out with me, okay? Even though he's not a millionaire, everybody thought he was. Because why would I be looking this good sitting next to him if he ain't paid?
If you're with a man who is 20 or 25 years older than you, many people are automatically going to assume that money plays a significant role in their relationship. Whether that's fair or not, it's the conclusion a lot of people will draw, because both men and women understand that a 25-year-old woman is rarely pursuing a 50-year-old man, primarily for his looks. In that sense, the relationship may make him appear successful or desirable because people assume he has the financial resources to attract a younger partner. But there is another side to that equation that people don't often talk about. It can also make both individuals look less credible in the eyes of people who believe relationships should be built on deeper foundations such as character, compatibility, mutual respect, shared values, emotional connection, and genuine affection. Those observers may look at the relationship and conclude that both parties are participating in an exchange rather than forming a genuine partnership. The man may be perceived as leveraging his resources, while the woman may be perceived as leveraging her youth, beauty, or desirability. Whether that perception is accurate is beside the point. The perception itself exists. The irony is that while both people may gain status within communities that prioritize wealth, beauty, or social leverage, they may lose credibility among people who place greater value on authenticity and emotional depth. Because for many people, the highest compliment is not, "That looks like an arrangement." It's, "They genuinely love, respect, and enjoy one another." Those are two very different forms of admiration. And if relationships become primarily transactional, people eventually stop seeing a partnership and start seeing a negotiation. Once that happens, both individuals risk being evaluated not as human beings, but as assets exchanging value. That may impress some people, but it will never impress everyone.
That's how you get stuff. If you want money, like cash, you have to do the same thing, except you have to ask for it. Like say, "Oh, let's go take a walk." Make sure the ATM is close by. "Oh, let's go take a walk." Hold his hand. I'm like, "Oh my God, I got to get some cash out. Oh my God, I forgot my ATM card." Go to the gym early on the rich part of town. Go there early in the morning. Go to the sporting goods store in the golf club section. Go to the country clubs. Go to the pickleball courts. Go to the driving ranges. Go to the exclusive nice grocery stores in the rich area.
This is the type of advice Shera often gives. Go for walks near ATMs, country clubs, or places where wealthy men supposedly spend their time. And to be honest, this is one of the reasons I became skeptical of her advice very early on. When I heard her repeatedly use country clubs as an example, I immediately questioned how familiar she actually was with those environments. At least where I live, country clubs are not public spaces that people casually wander into. Most country clubs have substantial initiation fees, often averaging around $250,000, along with annual dues, spending minimums, and guest restrictions. The reality is that these communities are highly insular. Staff members know the members by name. Members know one another. Guests are typically invited or signed in by existing members. You cannot simply stroll onto the property and start socializing with wealthy strangers. So when I hear advice suggesting that women should simply go hang around country clubs to meet wealthy men, it tells me that the advice is being given by someone who may not have much first-hand experience with how these spaces actually operate. Now, if she's referring to public golf courses, that's a different conversation. But even then, the assumption that every man playing golf at a public course is wealthy, or looking for a much younger woman to financially support, is a fantasy that doesn't reflect reality. This is one of my broader criticisms of the sprinkle philosophy. Much of the advice sounds plausible until you examine it closely. Then you realize many of the recommendations are based on stereotypes about wealthy people, rather than an accurate understanding of how affluent social circles function. In my opinion, people who have genuine access to wealth rarely talk about wealthy environments in this way. The advice often sounds less like practical guidance and more like an outsider's imagination of how wealthy people live. Another observation I have is that, despite encouraging women to pursue exceptionally wealthy men, Shera has never publicly claimed that James was a millionaire, or part of the ultra-wealthy class she often discusses. From what she has shared, she described him as a provider. In fact, I believe James's provision likely gave Shera the stability and flexibility to build her platform. However, building that platform was still work. Significant work. For years, she went live on both of her channels almost daily, often for 3 to 4 hours at a time on each channel. Even if someone argues that she was working for herself, the reality is that those hours constitute a full-time workload. I also remember that in the early stages of her platform, she publicly offered love and money spell work, sold beauty products and elixirs, self-published books, and later expanded into additional revenue streams. There is nothing inherently wrong with entrepreneurship. There is nothing wrong with building businesses or generating income. In fact, I respect the amount of consistency and effort required to build an audience of that size. What I find interesting, however, is the apparent disconnect between the lifestyle being promoted and the lifestyle being lived, which raises a fair question. If entrepreneurship, consistency, and personal effort played such a significant role in her own success, why is that not emphasized as heavily as the pursuit of wealthy men? Because from the outside looking in, it seems that much of Shera's financial success was created through her own labor, content creation, and business ventures, not simply through access to a provider. And some people may argue that Shera teaches women to use money received from men to build businesses, create income streams, and establish financial independence. Others may even classify some of her content as financial advice. That's a fair point. However, in the same breath, it raises an important question. If entrepreneurship and building your own wealth are ultimately the goal, then why is the wealthy man necessary in the first place? Because when I look at Shera's own life, I don't primarily see a woman who was fully provided for and removed from the workforce. I see a woman who worked. She wasn't a traditionally provided for woman in the way her audience often imagines. She effectively held a full-time job. For years, she live-streamed for hours every day, maintained multiple channels, created content, sold products, published books, marketed her businesses, and continuously monetized her audience. The evidence suggests that much of her financial success came from her own consistency, discipline, content creation, business ventures, and ability to build an audience, not from marrying an ultra-wealthy man. Which is why I sometimes find the messaging contradictory. On one hand, women are encouraged to pursue wealthy men as a pathway to security. On the other hand, the person delivering the message appears to have achieved her own success, primarily through years of sustained entrepreneurial effort. If entrepreneurship is the real vehicle for freedom, then perhaps that deserves far more emphasis than the pursuit of wealthy men. In fact, Shera could have easily evolved her platform into a message centered on building your own wealth, developing your own skills, creating businesses, and generating independent income streams. Her own life would arguably support that narrative far better than the sprinkle philosophy, yet she continues to promote the sprinkle mindset. Ironically, the most empowering aspect of Shera's story may not be the advice she gives, it may be the example she unintentionally set through her own work ethic and business acumen. The life she appears to have lived suggests that building something of your own is one of the most reliable paths to financial freedom, yet the message often remains focused on acquiring access to someone else's resources. And those are two very different philosophies. And then every so often, she'll post something like this.
I'm going to repeat that. Money is the leverage in every relationship. If you ain't got none, you ain't got no leverage.
If money is leverage, then why would you encourage young, impressionable women to place themselves in the hands of the very people who possess the most of it? That seems like a recipe for disaster. If wealth creates power, influence, and leverage within a relationship, then logic would suggest that the person with the least experience, the least resources, and the least bargaining power is often the most vulnerable, not the most empowered. This is one of the contradictions I struggle with when listening to this type of advice. On one hand, women are told that money gives men leverage. On the other hand, they are encouraged to pursue men who possess the greatest amount of that leverage. Those two ideas do not sit comfortably together. If your worldview assumes that people with power will inevitably exploit it, then sending young women into relationships where the power imbalance is greatest seems like an extraordinarily risky strategy.
You said, how long do you wait to ask for money? You start off giving them situations that you're going to need money very soon in. And if they can't give it to you, you have no more reason to see them. So literally just start talking about what you need first so that they can come up with ways that they can give it to you. How to get money without giving your body. False hope. Give them false hope. But don't give them your body. Give them false hope. Okay? And make sure that you're way better looking than them so that they believe that false hope. You don't give your body, you give false hope. Sprinkle, sprinkle.
This is where I believe this type of advice becomes genuinely dangerous. What is being described is not healthy relationship building. It is often a combination of manipulation, deception, strategic dishonesty, and calculated self-interest. Earlier in this video, I said that manipulation is a form of witchcraft. From a spiritual warfare perspective, manipulation opens doors to spirits of control, deception, pride, selfish ambition, seduction, domination, and confusion. And also spiritual oppression. The enemy does not care whether you call it game, strategy, sprinkling, or getting the bag. He cares about the principle behind it. The principle is simple: obtaining something through deception rather than through truth. The moment a person begins believing that lying, scheming, manipulating emotions, creating false personas, or exploiting vulnerabilities is justified because it produces a desired outcome, they have stepped onto dangerous spiritual ground. This is why Scripture repeatedly emphasizes truth, integrity, honesty, and upright character. God's kingdom operates through truth. Satan is described as the father of lies. There is no middle ground between those two systems. The spiritual realm operates on legal access. When people repeatedly engage in behaviors rooted in deception and control, they can unknowingly grant the enemy access to areas of their lives they later struggle to understand. What began as a tactic eventually becomes an identity. That is why I believe this type of advice is so dangerous. It isn't merely teaching women how to date. It is teaching people to adopt behaviors that can fundamentally alter their character and spiritual condition. God never called us to manipulate people into loving us. He never called us to deceive people into providing for us. He never called us to control people into staying with us. Those are the tactics of fear, not faith. The irony is that people often turn to manipulation because they are afraid of rejection, abandonment, poverty, loneliness, betrayal, or being hurt. But the very tactics they use to protect themselves often become the doorway through which even greater problems enter. And on a practical level, my concern has always been for the young women who take this advice literally. You have to be careful because we are dealing with real people, not characters in a strategy game. Not every man is emotionally healthy. Not every man is psychologically stable. Not every man handles rejection, humiliation, betrayal, or disappointment well. When you start operating from a mindset that encourages manipulation, deception, or using people for personal gain, you are taking a very real risk. Because what happens when the other person discovers they've been lied to? Not everyone responds rationally to those situations. Some people become obsessed, some become controlling, some become vindictive, some become dangerous. You may decide that you're done with the arrangement and want to move on, but the other person may not be willing to let go so easily. This is one of the reasons I find this type of advice so irresponsible. It assumes that every person involved is emotionally detached, logical, and operating from a place of complete self-control. Reality is far messier than that. Human beings develop attachments. Human beings become possessive, jealous, angry. And unfortunately, some human beings become violent. Just because someone has money, status, influence, or appears successful does not mean they are emotionally healthy. It does not mean they have good character. And especially, it does not mean they are psychologically stable. You never truly know what someone is carrying beneath the surface. And if your entire strategy depends on manipulating people, eventually you're going to encounter someone who doesn't respond to being manipulated the way you expected. That's not a risk I would encourage young women to take.
These dusties are the most violent and the most dangerous because you have nothing to lose. Okay, when you have nothing to lose, then you care less. And a lot of these guys, talk trash about men with money that have things to lose. They're not going to put their lives in jeopardy. They're not going to throw their lives in the garbage. They're not going to go murder people and kill people, then kill themselves because they have too much to live for.
By Shera's definition, a dusty is often a man who is unwilling or unable to provide at the level she believes a woman deserves. In many cases, the label is applied to men with lower-paying jobs, limited resources, or men who are still in the process of building their lives. But I think that framework lacks important context. A 23-year-old man who is just entering the workforce should not be evaluated by the same standards as a 45-year-old man who has had 2 decades to establish a career, accumulate assets, and develop professionally. Those are completely different stages of life. More importantly, a man's current circumstances are not always an accurate reflection of his future potential. Today's struggling young professional can become tomorrow's successful business owner, executive, entrepreneur, or provider. Life is dynamic. People grow. Careers evolve. Financial situations change. What concerns me is the assumption that men who are not yet financially established are somehow less worthy of consideration or inherently problematic, dangerous, and have nothing to lose. Don't those men have futures they are trying to build? Don't they have goals, ambitions, responsibilities, and aspirations? Don't they deserve the opportunity to become something before being dismissed as nothing? And before people twist my words, I am not saying women should financially support grown men, rescue them, or become rehabilitation centers for dysfunctional partners. There is a difference between building a man and building with a man. Building a man implies taking responsibility for his development. Building with a man means walking alongside someone who is already working towards something and allowing the relationship to grow as both people grow. Those are very different concepts. In fact, many women who invested in a man's potential and character, rather than his immediate financial circumstances, are now living comfortable lives with husbands who provide well for their families. I am one of those women. Of course, there will always be people online who dismiss those stories, or insist that every relationship must fit their worldview. Ultimately, every woman must make her own decisions. My point is simply this: just because a man cannot provide everything immediately does not mean he never will. Character often matters more than current circumstances. Work ethic often matters more than current income. Integrity often matters more than current status, and those qualities tend to reveal themselves long before wealth does. And Shera's own life doesn't appear to fully reflect the lifestyle she promotes. Yes, by her own account, James paid the mortgage and contributed financially. But paying for housing is also one of the most basic responsibilities of a husband. He had to live somewhere as well. They also have 2 daughters. Anyone familiar with childcare costs understands that, depending on a family's circumstances, having a parent at home can often be financially practical. Childcare, nannies, after-school programs, transportation, and other expenses add up quickly. I'm actually going to make a distinction that I rarely hear discussed online. Stay-at-home wives and stay-at-home mothers are not necessarily the same thing. Unlike Shera, I'm a stay-at-home wife, and I'm not planning to have kids anytime soon, so I know what I'm talking about. In many cases, a stay-at-home mother is making an economic decision for the family. Childcare is expensive, daycare is expensive, nannies are expensive. Depending on the number of children and the parents' incomes, it can make financial sense for one parent to remain home. I've heard men say this themselves: it's cheaper for my wife to stay home than it is to pay for childcare, and while that may be mathematically true, I don't necessarily view that as the same thing as being fully provided for. Because if the primary reason a woman is home is that she's a more cost-effective alternative to childcare, then her role is being evaluated through an economic lens. She is performing labor that would otherwise require compensation in the marketplace. That is very different from a situation where a woman has no children, could work if she wanted to, and her husband still prefers that she have the freedom not to. Personally, I believe stay-at-home wives occupy a different category than stay-at-home mothers for this reason. A stay-at-home mother is often providing substantial childcare, household management, scheduling, transportation, emotional labor, and countless other responsibilities that keep the family functioning. That is work, whether society chooses to recognize it as such or not. A stay-at-home wife without children is a different arrangement altogether. And before anyone gets upset, I'm not saying one is better than the other. I'm simply saying they're different. That's why I find it interesting when people online talk about being provided for without making that distinction. If a woman's primary reason for being home is childcare, then we should acknowledge that childcare itself has economic value. She is not doing nothing. She is performing work that would otherwise cost thousands of dollars per month. So the next time you hear influencers discussing provision, I would encourage you to listen carefully and ask a few follow-up questions. Are they a stay-at-home wife, or are they a stay-at-home mother? Because those are not necessarily the same experience, and treating them as though they are can create a lot of confusion about what provision actually looks like in practice. Also, one thing I've noticed is that genuinely happy, well-provided for women rarely encourage other women to lie, manipulate, scheme, or deceive their way into relationships. Why? Because they understand that a relationship built on dishonesty is unstable from the very beginning. If a man falls in love with a version of you that doesn't actually exist, if the relationship is built on hidden motives, or if your strategy depends on manipulating someone into providing for you, then you're creating a foundation that will eventually crack under pressure. Healthy marriages require trust, trust requires honesty, and honesty cannot coexist with a relationship strategy built around deception. That's why I find some of this advice so concerning. It promises security while encouraging behaviors that undermine the very thing security depends on. A relationship built on hidden agendas is not secure. It's a recipe for disaster. The women I know who are genuinely happy in their marriages are not teaching women how to deceive men. They're teaching women how to develop discernment, choose wisely, communicate effectively, maintain their standards, and build healthy relationships with healthy people. But even beyond that, Shera herself was not living a life of complete leisure. She worked. She live-streamed for hours every day. She managed multiple income streams. By any reasonable standard, spending 8 to 10 hours a day producing content, marketing products, engaging with an audience, and running online businesses constitutes a full-time job, which is why I sometimes feel she is selling a fantasy that her own life does not entirely support. She chose an ordinary man who happened to be about 20 years older than her. He allowed her to stay home while they raised 2 children, and, according to her own stories, bought her a computer so she could start working online. Paying the mortgage and buying your wife a computer to start a business is a far cry from the glamorous lifestyle she often encourages other women to pursue. When you compare the life she actually lived to the life she promotes, they appear to be 2 very different realities. I don't know, perhaps she's attempting to live vicariously through her audience and encouraging them to pursue the life she wished she had. I can't say that with certainty, of course. None of us can know another person's motivations, but when I compare the lifestyle she promotes to the life she has publicly described living, there appears to be a noticeable disconnect between the two.
Why do you look so young? Oh, because I don't work, baby. I don't work. I'm here for money, so I don't have to work. I think work ages people. I think work ages women a lot. I think stress. I think getting up every day to go to some job you hate ages you.
I do agree that working long hours can take a toll on people over time, which is one of the reasons my husband and I decided that I didn't need to work a traditional job. If I want to create content, that's different. I genuinely enjoy it. I do quite well with TikTok Shop, and at this point I make about as much as I used to make at my remote job. In fact, I often encourage women to explore TikTok Shop because there is still a tremendous amount of opportunity there. Even with increased competition, many people are earning meaningful income. And this channel is my baby. I love being able to discuss important topics, analyze culture, and hopefully help people think more critically about the world around them. But the key difference is that I don't rely on this channel or TikTok Shop to survive. The income is nice, but it isn't a necessity. My days are not consumed by trying to generate content for 8 to 10 hours. I have time to read books, do Pilates, visit museums, spend time learning, and simply enjoy life. To me, that is much closer to what people mean when they talk about a soft life. I am, by definition, a stay-at-home wife. Unlike Shera, you don't see me constantly posting, live streaming for hours every day, or relentlessly pushing products. And to be clear, I don't think there's anything wrong with selling products. In fact, I'm currently developing a product for my subscribers because they've been asking for it for a long time. The difference, in my opinion, is motivation. It's usually pretty easy to tell the difference between creators who create because they genuinely enjoy it and creators who appear to depend on it as their primary source of income. When I look at Shera's content over the years, I don't just see someone casually sharing her thoughts online. I see someone who appears heavily reliant on content creation as a business model. The volume of live streaming, selling, marketing, and monetization has always struck me as far more consistent with someone operating a full-time business than someone living the effortless, fully provided-for lifestyle she often promotes. Because when I think of a soft life and being provided for, I don't think of spending 8 to 10 hours a day, live streaming, selling products, managing audiences, and constantly producing content. To me, that's work, and honestly, a hard life. So to me, Shera is selling a fantasy that she may have wanted for herself, but never fully lived. The provided-for woman narrative is difficult for me to reconcile with the reality of her work ethic. Again, there is absolutely nothing wrong with working hard. In fact, I respect it, but when I compare the life she appears to have lived with the life she constantly describes as being married to a provider, I see two very different realities. The reality I see is a woman who spent years working and creating multiple streams of income. That's not the image most people have when they think of a woman who is completely provided for and free from financial responsibility. What's even more interesting is that many of the qualities she criticizes in other women, working long hours, hustling and financially contributing to their households, are qualities that seem far more reflective of her own life than the fantasy she promotes. I actually remember her dollar store hauls, the occasional vacations to very basic places, and what appeared to be a fairly ordinary lifestyle. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's how most people live. The house looked large, but context matters. Someone viewing it from New York might be impressed by the size, but in states like Texas, housing costs are significantly lower, and people generally get much more for their money. Again, there is nothing wrong with any of this. My point is not to criticize her lifestyle. My point is that her lifestyle appears relatively normal compared to the image often associated with the secure-the-bag philosophy she promotes. Based on publicly discussed information, James appears to have been a solid provider, but not the type of ultra-wealthy man that Shera frequently encourages women to pursue. And that's where I begin to ask questions. How can someone position themselves as an authority on attracting and securing exceptionally wealthy men when their own publicly documented life does not appear to reflect that experience? Because when I examine Shera's actual life story, what I do not see is someone with first-hand experience navigating the world of ultra-wealthy men. What I see is a woman who married a man she described as a provider, raised children, built businesses, worked consistently, and gradually created success for herself over time. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's a respectable and relatable story. But again, an obvious question. How can someone speak with such certainty about attracting, dating, and securing exceptionally wealthy men when that doesn't appear to be the life they personally lived? At best, she may be speaking from observation rather than experience. At worst, she may be selling an ideal that she herself never attained. Either way, it is important for people to recognize the distinction. Because there is a difference between learning from someone who has actually lived a particular reality and learning from someone who is theorizing about it. And when I look at Shera's life, the strongest lesson I see is not how to secure a wealthy man. The strongest lesson I see is how to build a platform, create businesses, and generate income through your own effort and consistency. Ironically, that may be the advice she is most qualified to give. I actually see a similar issue within parts of the tradwife space. Many of these creators promote an image of the well-provided-for stay-at-home wife spending her days baking bread, caring for her family, decorating her home, and engaging in traditionally feminine pursuits. Creators such as Nara Smith, Ballerina Farm, and many smaller influencers have built entire brands around this aesthetic, yet what often gets overlooked is that content creation itself is work. And not just work, it's a business. The type of highly produced content these creators make is some of the most labor-intensive content on the internet. Filming, scripting, lighting, editing, brand partnerships, posting schedules, audience management, and business operations require an enormous amount of time and effort behind the scenes. So while the audience is being shown a lifestyle of ease, simplicity, and domestic tranquility, the reality is that many of these women are running media businesses. In some cases, they may be among the hardest working entrepreneurs online. That's why I think people need to separate the aesthetic from the reality. The aesthetic is traditional homemaking. The reality is often full-time content creation. Again, there is nothing wrong with that. But let's call things what they are. Many of these women are not simply homemakers. They are business owners, marketers, content producers, and entrepreneurs who happen to package their work through the lens of traditional femininity. And I think that's where people get confused. They begin comparing their real lives to a curated product. At the end of the day, traditional is also a far more flexible concept than social media would have you believe. If the women in your family worked alongside their husbands, then that is part of your tradition. If the women in your family stayed home, then that is part of your tradition. The point is that you do not need strangers on the internet to tell you what your life should look like. You can choose to keep the traditions you inherited. You can choose to modify them. You can choose to create something entirely different. But don't allow influencers, whether they're selling the sprinkle lifestyle, the tradwife lifestyle, or the feminists, to convince you that your life is somehow inadequate because it doesn't resemble the carefully curated image they're presenting online. Because more often than not, you're comparing your reality to someone else's marketing.
Start lying, girls. I lied a lot in my relationship, and I still be laughing to this day because he has no idea, and I'm married.
Number 1, if you're willing to lie in your relationships, chances are you're willing to lie outside of them as well. Deception is rarely compartmentalized. Once someone becomes comfortable manipulating the truth to get what they want in one area of life, that behavior often spills into other areas. What concerns me is that this type of behavior is sometimes shared online as though it's something to be proud of, as though dishonesty is a sign of intelligence rather than a sign of poor character. Psychologically speaking, repeatedly relying on deception can change the way a person relates to others. It can make them more cynical, less empathetic, more self-serving, and more comfortable viewing people as tools rather than human beings. Over time, manipulation can become a habit rather than an occasional choice. Repeatedly engaging in manipulation, deceit, exploitation, and using people for personal gain can reinforce antisocial traits and unhealthy patterns of relating to others. And once that happens, genuine intimacy becomes almost impossible because intimacy requires honesty, vulnerability, trust, and mutual respect, the very things manipulation erodes. And number 2, even though Shera has often said that James didn't care about what she said online, I personally find that difficult to believe completely. Every healthy relationship requires mutual respect. Men deserve respect, women deserve respect. Publicly turning your spouse into the butt of the joke, repeatedly speaking about them with contempt, or building an audience by ridiculing the opposite sex is not something I would consider conducive to a healthy marriage. More broadly, anyone telling women that they can manipulate men into becoming providers so they can do whatever they want while living a soft life is selling a fantasy. What many of these influencers are really doing is creating their own hierarchy. They position themselves as the authority figure, place vulnerable followers beneath them, and then sell those followers a blueprint for escaping their problems. Whether the blueprint actually works becomes secondary to the business model itself. Now consider the contradiction of claiming to be happily married to a provider while simultaneously building an entire brand around teaching women how to exploit, manipulate, and extract from men. That tension is difficult to ignore. Men and women are socialized differently. While there are always exceptions, many men are raised with the expectation that they should be respected, competent, and capable. Their sense of identity is often closely tied to how they are perceived by others. Because of that, I find it difficult to believe that most men, regardless of income level, would be entirely unaffected by a spouse who publicly builds a following by criticizing, mocking, or encouraging adversarial attitudes toward men. Even if the man remains silent publicly, that doesn't necessarily mean there was no impact privately, and the consequences rarely stop with the couple. Once a relationship becomes content, it ceases to belong entirely to the people inside it. Friends, family members, social circles, and eventually children become part of the audience, whether they consent to it or not. And there is nothing feminine about building relationships on distrust, humiliation, and power struggles. A truly soft life is not defined by how much money someone extracts from another person. It is defined by peace, stability, mutual respect, emotional safety, and healthy relationships. Those things cannot be manipulated into existence. There has also been a lot of discussion online regarding Shera's employment history, including claims from people who say they knew her locally. For the longest time, I thought she was based in Houston, but I'm now realizing much of this appears to be connected to Galveston, which is roughly an hour away. I've actually spent a lot of time in Texas growing up while visiting family, so I'm fairly familiar with those areas. I like Galveston. Some beaches are nice, although the currents can be intense. I almost drowned there once. Great memories. But getting back to the point, there are also public court records that people online have circulated showing legal issues associated with Shera, including allegations of multiple DUIs, disorderly conduct, and resisting arrest. Those records are matters of public record, meaning anyone can look them up and verify them for themselves. I'm not bringing this up to shame her. Everyone has a past, and everyone has made mistakes. What I find relevant, however, is that when someone builds a platform based on presenting themselves as an authority on life, relationships, decision-making, and human behavior, their own history naturally becomes part of the conversation. It honestly didn't surprise me when online investigators uncovered what appear to be Shera's previous places of employment, including work at a gym cafeteria and a leasing office as recently as last year. If accurate, that would make her what most women are, a regular working woman with a traditional employment history. What I found more interesting, however, were some of the public records that have circulated online regarding her relationship with James. According to records that online investigators have discussed, there was an arrest record from 2003 alleging that James intentionally or recklessly caused bodily injury to Shera by choking her. There are also records showing that they later married in 2006. Now, I want to be careful because none of us know the full story. Public records can show that an arrest occurred, but they cannot tell us everything that happened behind closed doors. If the publicly discussed records are accurate and Shera married a man who was allegedly abusive, then why does so little of her content focus on recognizing abuse, identifying dangerous relationship patterns, setting boundaries, and protecting women from harm? Because if the greatest challenge in her own relationship was potentially unhealthy relationship dynamics, then those lessons would seem far more valuable to women than endless discussions about securing a bag. Perhaps that's because the money narrative is easier to sell, or perhaps it's because much of the ultra-wealthy lifestyle she promotes was never something she personally experienced. I don't know. What I do know is that lessons about discernment, self-respect, emotional health, and recognizing red flags would likely be far more useful to the average woman than advice centered on obtaining a lifestyle that the person teaching it does not appear to have lived herself.
Hey y'all, public service announcement. Once again, I am here to inform you. I am not a dating coach. I am a get your money from these men coach. Okay? I'm not here to tell you how to have a happy, healthy, emotionally stable relationship. I'm here to tell you how to get your money, keep your money, grow your money by using his and saving yours. I'm here to teach you that you should not be going 50-50 and that you should definitely not be reaching in your wallet when you're in the presence of a grown, able-bodied man. Thank you. Sprinkle, sprinkle.
So, again, I find myself asking the same question. If Shera spent years working long hours, was married to a man who reportedly earned a fairly ordinary income, and built much of her success through her own businesses and content creation, then on what basis is she teaching women how to secure ultra-wealthy men? Because those are two very different realities, and when it comes to financial advice, I remain equally skeptical. I remember watching her live streams years ago, and I specifically remember her talking about buying Coca-Cola stock through Robinhood. Now, there is absolutely nothing wrong with buying Coca-Cola stock. However, Coca-Cola is already included in the S&P 500, along with hundreds of other major companies. One of the most basic principles of investing is diversification. Most beginner investing books discuss diversification and broad market index funds within the first few chapters. For the average investor, broad market index funds are often considered a more foundational approach than concentrating money in a single stock. Again, that doesn't make the investment wrong. It simply isn't the type of sophisticated financial insight that would lead me to view someone as a financial authority. Which brings me back to the larger issue. How can someone position themselves as an expert on securing ultra-wealthy men when there is little evidence that they have personally lived that reality? And what exactly qualifies as financial advice in this context? Shera frequently tells women to start a business, which in theory is good advice. But what kind of business? How do you identify a market? How do you acquire customers? How do you manage cash flow, taxes, marketing, operations, or scaling? Those are the details that actually matter. Telling people to start a business is easy. Teaching them how to build a profitable one is much harder. The same applies to investing. Buying a stock or opening a brokerage account is not financial literacy. Financial literacy involves understanding budgeting, debt management, risk, diversification, investing principles, retirement planning, and long-term wealth building. That's why I find it odd when people refer to Shera as a financial advisor. There are thousands of channels online dedicated specifically to financial education. Many are run by investors, accountants, economists, financial planners, entrepreneurs, and business owners who spend their entire careers teaching people how to build wealth. If your goal is to learn how to invest, build a business, manage money, or create long-term financial security, I think those are probably the people you should be learning from.
I'm just going to be 1,000% honest. If I were 22 today, I would not be dating Black men at all. Unless they were older. They'd have to be real old.
Well, her husband was significantly older than her, so I don't really understand that statement.
Even though I was married for 20 years and with the same person for 25 years, you can take it from me that now that I'm living without a man in the house, I actually, sadly, like it better. Even though I was married for 20 years, it's so much better living without another person in the house.
At this point, I'm starting to wonder whether Shera was ever truly happy in the type of relationship she promotes. On one hand, she has made statements suggesting if she was younger, she would not consider dating Black men, and if she did, it would be under very specific circumstances, such as a significant age gap, which, incidentally, was the case in her own marriage. On the other hand, she now speaks about being happier without a man in her home. When I step back and look at the broader picture, I don't see someone describing a relationship they would want other women to emulate. I see someone who may have experienced significant disappointment, conflict, and trauma. If the publicly discussed court records are accurate, there were allegations of physical abuse before the marriage. By Shera's own account, the relationship began while James was still married. And despite promoting the image of a fully provided for wife, she appears to have worked extensively both before and during her online career. Taken together, it paints a picture that is far more complicated than the fantasy often being sold. Of course, none of us can know what was in her heart, and I don't want to pretend that I know whether she regrets her life choices, but what I do see is a woman who appears to have lived a difficult life and may have wanted something different for herself. It's possible that, with genuinely good intentions, she is trying to help other women achieve what she believes would lead to a better outcome. The problem, in my view, is that advice is often shaped by personal experiences. Perhaps her life experiences shattered her belief in romantic love, trust, or lifelong commitment. Perhaps they convinced her that relationships are ultimately transactional, and that emotional detachment is safer than vulnerability. The sad part is that I don't see someone who was ever genuinely happy. I see someone who may have learned how to survive, adapt, protect herself, and even succeed. But happiness, peace, contentment, trust, and genuine fulfillment are very different things. Sometimes people mistake survival strategies for wisdom. They spend so much time protecting themselves from pain that they lose faith in the possibility of something better. And this is why I always tell people to be careful about who they learn from. If you're not careful, you'll start absorbing someone else's worldview, someone else's fears, someone else's disappointments, and someone else's unresolved wounds. Before long, you may find yourself viewing relationships, men, women, and life through the lens of experiences that were never yours to begin with. That's why discernment matters. Not every lesson someone teaches is a lesson they successfully live.
Lie about everything. Your name, your career, if you have kids or not. Lie to tell them exactly what they need to hear to open that wallet for you. If y'all don't know what my honesty sandwich is, it's how to make a lie really believable. You mix lies with truth. You mix lies with truths and facts. Okay? Just like the media. Okay, that's why most of y'all believe a lot of stuff in the media, because they mix it with truth and facts. So, Shera, that's Bible. Yep. Just like the Bible. Mix you some stuff up. Throw some history in there. Throw in a major event in your lie. The key to making a great lie, throw a major event that everyone remembers. Throw it in there. Oh, you remember when it flooded, or you remember 9/11? Okay, well, that day or the day after, honesty sandwich. Mix some history in there. Put some main events in there. Throw you some sad story in there. He gonna believe it. Honesty sandwich. And once you're that good at it, it's just gonna become natural. I have no guilt about lying to a man whatsoever. I will lie as long as it benefits me, darling. As long as I'm getting what I want in life, I will lie. I'm not denying it. Who cares? Y'all do it all the time. At least I'm honest about it. Honest about lying. How you doing? There's no more guilt. I'm so sorry. There's zero guilt left over there. Because, men lie so much. It should be y'all's language. Y'all should know a lie when y'all hear a lie. If you don't catch it, that's your fault. Okay? You can lie. Too many of y'all are too honest, and that's why y'all are too alone. Okay? So, shut up. Don't talk about other men. Make sure you're always busy with something to do with yourself. And they will chase you and make you wife, not you beg them to be your boyfriend.
One thing I've noticed is that Shera often laughs when she tells women to lie, manipulate, or conceal their true intentions. Personally, I don't think that's something we should normalize or celebrate. No one should be going online encouraging deception as a life strategy. Lying is deception. Deception is witchcraft. Witchcraft opens spiritual doors. That is not something to take lightly. When you repeatedly engage in deception, you're not just affecting other people, you are affecting yourself. You're cursing your life. And I said this earlier. If you start lying in one area of your life, it rarely stays there. It spills over into other areas. The habit follows you. Before long, you're becoming the type of person who lies reflexively because deception has become normal. You're shaping your own character. You're training yourself to operate through dishonesty rather than integrity. Over time, those habits become patterns, and those patterns become part of who you are. Very few people wake up one day and decide to become dishonest. It happens gradually. A small lie becomes a larger lie. Manipulation becomes second nature. Before long, deception becomes your default way of interacting with the world. While lying does not automatically create a mental illness, habitual deception can reinforce unhealthy and antisocial traits. It can erode empathy, weaken accountability, and encourage people to view others as objects to be managed rather than human beings to be respected. Eventually, the deception stops being something you do. It becomes who you are. That's why I think this type of advice is so dangerous. People think they're learning how to get ahead, when in reality they may be slowly transforming themselves into the very type of person they would never want to be around.
These studies are the most violent and the most dangerous because you have nothing to lose.
I want to briefly revisit this point again. Shera advocates for women pursuing significantly older and wealthier men, but do you understand how dangerous some of those situations can be? One of the cases I think about when I hear this type of age gap, secure the bag relationship advice, is the tragic case of Pamela Giannini. There are many such examples. This is just one of them. In October 2025, 29-year-old Italian model Pamela Giannini was found unalived outside her home in Milan. Authorities later arrested her 52-year-old ex-boyfriend, and reports suggested he had struggled to accept the end of their relationship. Investigators reportedly believed the crime was personal and emotionally motivated. At first, it seemed like a tragic but closed chapter. Pamela's family began the process of laying her to rest. While arrangements were being made for a permanent mausoleum, she was placed in a temporary burial site in a cemetery in Bergamo. Then, months later, another disturbing development emerged. On March 23, 2026, cemetery workers reportedly discovered signs that her coffin had been tampered with. According to reports, the screws appeared to have been loosened and resecured. Even more horrifying, they allegedly discovered that her remains had been desecrated and that her head had been removed. With her ex-boyfriend reportedly behind bars, some online discussions have speculated that other individuals may have been involved. Others have pointed to the disturbing nature of what allegedly happened and suggested that it appeared ritualistic. To be clear, there is no public evidence proving either of those claims. That said, speaking only for myself, I do find the circumstances unusual enough to raise questions. The alleged desecration of her remains was so disturbing and extreme that I personally understand why some people have interpreted it as having a ritualistic element. Do I know that for a fact? No. Do I believe it is a possibility? Yes. What a lot of younger women need to understand is that when you deal with significantly older and wealthier men, you are often dealing with a completely different level of power. Those men tend to have connections, influence, resources, and social networks that the average person simply doesn't have access to. And whether people want to admit it or not, some of those men do not view younger women as equals. They view them as accessories, status symbols, or possessions. A younger man who starts acting out can often be dealt with through ordinary social consequences. Family members step in, friends step in, people around you can help create distance and accountability. But when you're dealing with a wealthy, influential, and emotionally unstable person, the situation can become far more complicated. Money, connections, influence creates leverage, and power in the wrong hands can be dangerous. Now, to be clear, I am not saying all wealthy older men are dangerous. What I am saying is that women should stop assuming that wealth automatically means safety, character, or emotional stability. In my opinion, some women underestimate how ruthless certain powerful people can be when they feel rejected, embarrassed, exposed, or deprived of control. Especially if you start moving through life with the kind of arrogance, deception, and manipulation that Shera often encourages. This is not a fantasy. These are not characters in a movie. These are real people with real emotions, real influence, and in some cases, real power. One of my biggest concerns with this type of advice is that it treats relationships like a game where the objective is to outsmart the other person. But when you're dealing with actual human beings, especially people who are older, wealthier, more experienced, and potentially more influential, that mindset can become incredibly dangerous. This is ultimately my biggest criticism of the sprinkle mindset. At its core, it often treats dating as a game, a series of strategies, tactics, and manipulations designed to gain leverage and secure the best possible outcome. If you're cynical enough, you could argue that all dating is a negotiation of interests, but I don't agree with that worldview, because every game has winners and losers, and nobody ever wants to talk about what happens when you lose. The conversation is always centered around the success stories. The objective, we're told, is to find a man who provides everything, funds your lifestyle, becomes emotionally invested, and is willing to do whatever it takes to keep you around. But what about the women who don't win? What about the women who follow this advice and discover that the men they are dealing with are not naive, emotionally healthy, or benevolent? Because men do catch on to these games, and the reality is that very few people are willing to provide everything without expecting something in return. For a small percentage of men, perhaps that expectation is relatively harmless, but for others, provision comes with conditions. It comes with entitlement. It comes with expectations of control, access, obedience, or ownership. And that is where a transactional relationship can become dangerous. The same financial dependence that feels secure can become a weapon. The same man who once seemed generous can become controlling when he believes he has purchased influence over your life.
Be better at the game than him. Ooh. Be better at it.
We rarely hear from the women who attempted to play these games with powerful, wealthy, or controlling men and found themselves trapped in emotionally abusive situations. And when we do hear from those women, it's often too late. That's why stories like Pamela Giannini are important. We could also point to cases like Ashlee, Janae, and Valeria Marquez. Were they the losers of some dating game? No, they were victims. And that's my problem with so much of the sprinkle content. The conversation is almost always about the upside. It's about the lifestyle, the money, the gifts, the provision, the manipulation tactics, and how to gain leverage. It's about how wonderful life can be if you successfully play the game. But where is the conversation about the casualties? Where is the conversation about the women who encountered the wrong man? Where is the conversation about the women who became trapped in controlling relationships? Where is the conversation about the women who mistook provision for protection? Where is the conversation about the women who paid the highest possible price? The reality is that every strategy has risks, every game has consequences, yet much of this content focuses exclusively on the potential rewards, while barely acknowledging the dangers. When you're encouraging women to pursue relationships based primarily on money, power, status, and leverage, a lot of times you're sending them toward the predators. The victims rarely get featured in the success stories, but they exist, and they deserve to be part of the conversation too.
I think women that have their own money and that have a lot of money, y'all don't even need to get married.
Ironically, Shera herself appears to be a victim of the sprinkle mindset. She married a significantly older man who, according to publicly discussed records, was allegedly physically abusive even before the marriage. By many accounts, it does not appear to have been a fairy tale relationship, and now she advocates for women not to marry for love at all. To me, that's telling. Because women who have experienced healthy love generally encourage others to seek healthy love. Women who have been deeply hurt often teach others how to avoid being hurt again. I don't see someone who was ever genuinely happy. I see someone who may have been profoundly disappointed by relationships and built an entire philosophy around that disappointment. And if that's true, then Shera isn't the success story of the sprinkle mindset. She's one of its victims. And unfortunately, victims often create more victims. When you've been shaped by unhealthy relationship dynamics, the advice you give others can end up reproducing the very patterns that hurt you in the first place. Which brings me to the next victim, the trophy wife.
I would not be where I am today without her teachings. She is really helping women to realize their worth and value and not just laying around with any old man, boy, dusty, what so have you, and requiring more from men to have access to us, which I think is really something that was the standard years ago. So what she's teaching is something that has been practiced longer than what's going on right now in the world, or at least in the Western world here in America. I think that it's truly a blessing to have someone like her showing us that we don't have to accept less, that we don't have to settle for bare minimum when it comes to men, especially if you look good. So many women are accepting the bare minimum from men who did not even deserve to be in our presence. So yes, I love what Shera is doing, teaching women to know their value, to know their worth, not to settle for just any old thing, not to be sleeping with men who have not invested and allow us to rest more easily in our femininity. So I can't stand when people come on my channel saying anything negative about Shera, because Shera is our hypergamous queen. I mean, she has changed so many women's lives, and as you know, including mine. So I will forever be grateful for her teachings and the lessons that I've learned through her. It's like I built this channel and this whole brand around being this man's wife and trying to teach other women how to attract good men and provider men and all these different things. And I truly held my husband, or saw him, as the bar for what every woman should, type of man that, or type of husband that every woman should aspire to have. And I didn't realize that the person I married was actually going to be my biggest nightmare.
Imagine changing your 4-year-old daughter's diaper and realizing that she was really red and in pain down there. So you asked her, has anybody ever touched you? And she says, yes, Daddy. And what you do is you get her and your other kids out of the house before he makes it home, and you take them to the hospital. And you have them check your other children as well, and come to find out, not only have he been essaying your 4-year-old daughter, he's also essayed your 2-year-old daughter. And you are a content creator who has built your channel around being a trophy wife and having a trophy husband. And now you have to rethink everything because this man that you put on a pedestal have been essaying his own children. It's a very, very sad story. Her name is Isis. Her page is A Trophy Wife. The full video is on her YT channel. It is very sad. I can tell that she's beating herself up. But you will never expect for a father to be touching their own children. This is a very sad story. So my prayers go out to her and to those kids that was harmed. But you guys, don't ever look up to another couple because you never know what's really going on behind closed doors.
The trophy wife, soft life, and provider content space is selling many women a fantasy. At its core, it is marketing hope to women who are often carrying very real wounds around love, family, security, provision, and belonging. Many of these women, myself included, grew up without stable homes, healthy relationships, financial security, or positive examples of marriage. They understandably want someone to fill that void and make life easier. I understand that desire completely. The problem is that when we make major life decisions from unresolved trauma, we often end up creating more trauma. That's why the story of Isis, better known as Trophy Wife, is so important. What I appreciate about Isis is that she was honest. Unlike many influencers who endlessly sell the dream, she eventually showed people what happened when the dream collapsed. For years, she built a platform around attracting a provider man and creating a financially supported lifestyle. Much of her audience consisted of single mothers and women searching for stability. Her life was presented as evidence that this path worked. Then reality intervened. She later revealed that the man she married allegedly SA'd their daughters. A woman teaching other women how to find safety through a provider man ultimately discovered that financial provision and emotional safety are not the same thing. Many women who consume this content are not actually looking for a provider. They're looking for safety, they're looking for healing, they're looking for the love, protection, and security they never received growing up. The problem is that trauma distorts judgment. When you've lived through instability, poverty, neglect, abandonment, or abuse, it becomes much harder to accurately assess character. You can become so focused on finding relief that you stop asking whether the person offering that relief is actually safe. Money solves money problems, but it does not solve character problems, emotional problems, abuse, and trauma. And that's why I believe relationship advice is one of the most dangerous things a person can teach. You can teach social media, business, trading, marketing, whatever. But teaching people how to choose a spouse is an entirely different responsibility because the consequences are so much greater. The women most vulnerable to this content are often the women who have suffered the most. Women who are exhausted, women carrying generational trauma, women desperate for relief. Provider content offers a simple solution to a very complicated problem, but generational trauma, low self-esteem, childhood neglect, and family dysfunction cannot be solved by finding a man. Those wounds require healing, and if they remain unhealed, there is a risk that the same cycle simply repeats itself in a different package. What struck me most about her story was that she shared that she herself had been SA'd as a child, and then, years later, her daughters allegedly experienced something similar. And I want to take this conversation into the spiritual realm for a moment. The enemy thinks in generations. If he can wound a child early, he often creates consequences that echo throughout an entire lifetime. Trauma has a way of shaping how people see themselves, how they form relationships, what they tolerate, and the choices they make. That's why childhood trauma is so devastating. The damage rarely stops with one person. When Christians talk about familiar spirits, they are referring to demonic spirits that operate through recurring patterns within families and bloodlines. These spirits seek to establish strongholds by repeating the same types of bondage, trauma, addictions, abuse, dysfunction, or destruction across multiple generations. From this perspective, what appears to be a repeating family pattern is not merely psychological or environmental. It is also spiritual. The goal is to keep the cycle going for as long as possible by ensuring that the same wounds, sins, and traumas are passed from one generation to the next. That is why spiritual warfare is so important. Someone has to recognize the pattern, confront it, pray against it, and refuse to pass it on. Otherwise, the cycle continues repeating itself generation after generation. That's why parents need to be vigilant. And if you are someone who experienced abuse as a child and now have children of your own, you have every reason to be intentional about their protection, their environment, and the people you allow access to them. Because predators rarely arrive looking like predators. More often, they arrive as trusted people. Family members, partners, friends, authority figures, people who have already gained access to your trust. That's how familiar spirits are believed to operate. They work through people who are closest to you, using existing relationships, trust, and access as entry points for attack. Their objective is to establish and maintain a foothold within a family line, to secure spiritual real estate, so to speak, by keeping cycles of trauma, abuse, dysfunction, and brokenness repeating across generations. Because a healthy, loving marriage is a threat to that agenda. Strong families break cycles. Healthy marriages create stability. Protected children become healthy adults, and once a family begins healing, the generational cycle starts to lose its grip. Now, from the outside looking in, Isis appeared to do everything Shera teaches. She pursued an older provider man with a significant age gap, roughly 20 years. Like Shera, she built content around the provider lifestyle and publicly spoke about the benefits of being financially supported. She openly praised Shera's teachings and at one point credited them as part of her success story. In many ways, she seemed to be living proof that the sprinkle philosophy worked, which is why what happened next is so important to this conversation. Because when Isis later shared her devastating news, this was Shera's response.
Anybody marries somebody after 1 week, they dumb. I'm sorry. Sprinkle, sprinkle. If you dumb enough to do that, I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry. But if you're sitting out there, you learned everything from me. Did you learn how to be smart? Did you learn how not to be desperate? Then you didn't learn from me. Did you hear when I said stop being desperate? Did you hear when I said don't be a pygmalion? Did you hear when I talked about background checks? Did you hear when I talked about all this other stuff? About not dealing with men if you have kids until they're old and grown enough to speak for themselves and be in school and whatnot. Did you not hear when I said all of that? Don't blame me. I tell people all the time, don't say my name if you are desperate and being pygmalion. Don't claim me. If you are desperate and you're not smart enough to get the bag, flip the money, have options. If you stupid, don't claim me. If your IQ is low, please don't claim me. I teach women to be smart, not desperate. If you're desperate, don't claim me.
The problem is that this type of advice is rarely taught with adequate context, safeguards, or accountability. Personally, I would never teach these strategies to young women, and if I did, it would require constant supervision, nuance, and repeated warnings about the risks involved. Shera can't do that. She is speaking to hundreds of thousands of people online, many of whom will take a few clips, a few catchphrases, and run with them. That's what makes influencer advice so dangerous. People don't just hear the message, they apply it to their lives. And that's why I found the Isis situation so interesting. Because Shera had no issue with Isis building a platform, praising her teachings, and crediting her for helping shape her success story, while everything appeared to be working out. But when Isis's story took a tragic turn, Shera seemed eager to distance herself from her, and the way she did it just didn't sit right with me. This was a woman publicly dealing with something unimaginably traumatic involving her children. Whether you agree with her decisions or not, basic human compassion should come first. Instead, the response felt cold, dismissive, and lacking in empathy. Now, I'm not going to diagnose Shera with anything. That's not my place, and none of us can assess someone's mental health through internet clips. What I will say is that the response struck me as emotionally detached. The focus seemed to be on assigning blame rather than extending compassion to someone who was clearly suffering. A lack of empathy can be associated with antisocial personality traits and is often observed in people who struggle to genuinely care about the feelings, suffering, or well-being of others. One thing that also bothered me about the criticism directed at Isis was the assumption that she simply ignored her children. From what she has publicly shared, her 2 older sons were school-aged and capable of communicating concerns for themselves. The allegations involved her 2 younger daughters and their father. What makes it even more disturbing is that, as she has publicly stated, her husband has not been placed on a sex offender registry. She has argued that the allegations involving her daughters were not given the same weight because of their young age. If that is true, then it highlights a very uncomfortable reality. A background check can only reveal what has been documented, reported, investigated, and adjudicated. People often say, just check his record. But what if there is no record? What if the victims are too young to testify? What if the abuse was never reported? What if the allegations never resulted in a conviction? A clean record is not the same thing as a clean character, and that's precisely why discernment matters so much. Another thing Isis publicly shared was that, according to her account, her husband forced himself on her multiple times at the beginning of their relationship, yet she still went on to marry him because she believed he could provide the stability and security she was looking for. What struck me was the similarity to Shera's own story. There is a public record documenting James's arrest for allegedly choking Shera prior to their marriage, yet despite that incident, she still chose to marry him. In both cases, these women appear to have overlooked serious red flags in pursuit of provision, stability, or a better future. And that is exactly why I believe this conversation matters. Because the desire for security can sometimes cause people to rationalize behavior that would otherwise be recognized as unacceptable. The irony is that Shera and Isis seem to have walked a very similar path. Both appear to have ignored significant warning signs. Both were pursuing security. Both believed they had found a solution. The difference is that one story is often presented as a success story, while the other became a public tragedy, which is why I find it difficult to understand the harsh judgment directed at Isis. If anything, her story demonstrates the same lesson Shera's story does. Provision is not the same thing as character, and financial security is not the same thing as actual safety. And that's why I believe many online dating coaches continue giving advice while carrying unresolved trauma of their own. The problem is that trauma doesn't disappear simply because someone becomes successful, attractive, wealthy, or gains a large audience. In fact, sometimes the audience masks the wound. People can spend years teaching others how to navigate relationships while never fully addressing their own pain, fears, insecurities, or unhealthy patterns. Eventually, reality catches up. And when it does, the disconnect between the advice being sold and the life being lived becomes impossible to ignore. We've seen that happen before. We've seen influencers build entire platforms around self-worth, relationships, and personal transformation, only for their own lives to eventually reveal unresolved wounds beneath the surface. And in my opinion, that's exactly what happened with Wizard Liz. Wizard Liz needs little introduction at this point. Transitioning from the trophy wife story to the Wizard Liz saga, I have to point something out. When the news about ISIS broke, many creators were quick to criticize her. They said she moved too fast. They said she ignored red flags. They said she should have been more careful. But Liz moved fast too. In fact, ISIS at least got married. By traditional standards, she did what many people would consider the right thing. And even if she had waited longer, there's no guarantee the outcome would have been different. Abusive people are often very skilled at hiding their true nature. Yet the conversation around Liz was completely different. Instead of criticism, she was largely met with sympathy. The narrative became that Landon was trying to destroy a powerful woman. Very few people applied the same standards to her that they applied to ISIS. Why? Was it because Liz has a larger platform? Better branding? A more polished image? I don't know. What I do know is that, to this day, I have seen very little accountability. I have yet to hear her say, I moved too fast, I made mistakes, I exercised poor judgment, I ignored red flags, I chose to invest money into this relationship, I chose to support his business, I chose to become deeply involved with him, and I lied to my audience about being married, about breaking up with him while continuing a relationship, and gaslighting Abby when she came forward trying to help me. Unlike Liz, ISIS eventually came forward and took accountability. She openly admitted that she felt her channel had been built on a false premise, and she later deleted it. Now, I'm not saying Liz should delete her channel too. That's not my point. My point is that accountability has a certain look to it. Remorse has a certain look to it. When people genuinely reflect on their mistakes, they usually acknowledge their role in what happened. They don't have to take all the blame, but they take some responsibility. What stood out to me about ISIS was her willingness to say, in essence, I got this wrong. To this day, I have yet to hear Liz say something similar. Instead, the responsibility always seems to belong to someone else, and that's what separates accountability from blame shifting. When news of Landon's alleged attempt to cheat first broke, I posted this on my community wall. As you can see, this was about a year ago. At the time, however, I personally felt about Liz did not change my opinion of what I believed Landon had done. Most of you know that I had already made a video criticizing Liz, yet at the time, I believed Liz was a victim. In this post, I pointed out how some men intentionally target women, manipulate them, and in some cases attempt to baby trap them for their own purposes. Today, I no longer see the situation the same way, and because my opinion has changed so dramatically, I'm going to take this post down. The reason is simple. I no longer believe it accurately reflects my current view of the situation. Looking back now, with everything that has come out over the past year, I do not see Liz as someone who was simply acted upon. I see someone who made choices, ignored warning signs, and played an active role in creating the situation she now finds herself in. You don't have to agree with me, but if I'm going to ask people to trust my opinions, then I also have to be willing to admit when my own opinion changes. I believe Liz thought she had found a future tech mogul. I believe she saw potential, invested heavily into that potential, became emotionally attached to that potential, and made decisions based on what she believed the future would look like.
How much? Gave him 143,000, half.
Yeah, for his
50K?
business, by the
50K.
way, for his business. So I want to make that very clear. That wasn't for him. That was an investment in the business.
That's why I personally think the real issue here is deeper than just cheating or lying. She likely believed she had secured a future tech millionaire, the next Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk type. And let's be honest, men in tech who know how to speak in big startup language can sound extremely convincing, especially when they're selling a vision of future wealth and success. He probably used a large portion of his early seed funding to woo her. The expensive ring, luxury gifts, designer lifestyle, all of it. Then when the cheating scandal happened, she still followed him to the States and continued the relationship because she was likely still betting on his future success. He likely told her that the seed money was gone and that she needed to hold things down financially while he tried to raise a Series A round. And honestly, that would explain a lot. A lot of early-stage startup founders burn through seed funding quickly trying to maintain the image of success before the company is actually profitable. If he never made it to the later funding stages or struggled to secure serious investors, that tech millionaire lifestyle could have been far more fragile than it appeared online. Which would also explain why she allegedly started helping financially, paying for things, relocating, and continuing to invest into the relationship even after the cheating scandal. She may have still believed the breakthrough was coming and that the sacrifice would eventually pay off. That's why the resentment in the live felt so tied to money, status, luxury items, and financial support. It gave the impression of someone realizing the future they were sold may not actually materialize. And when that future failed to materialize, everything began to unravel. Again, that's my opinion. What concerns me more is her behavior today. According to the court documents I discussed in my previous video, both parties were reportedly instructed to refrain from publicly disparaging one another online, because doing so could be used in the custody proceedings. Yet Liz continues to bash Landon every single chance she gets, and that raises a question. If you know for a fact that your ability to see your child could be affected by your online behavior, why continue engaging in conduct that could potentially be used against you? Most parents would become extremely cautious. Most parents would become silent. Most parents would prioritize protecting their relationship with their child. Which is why I find the situation so difficult to understand, because the actions and the stated goals do not seem aligned, and when actions and words repeatedly contradict one another, I tend to pay attention to the actions. Landon may be deeply flawed, but that does not automatically make Liz innocent. That is the problem with social media narratives. People want a villain and a victim because it makes the story easier to process, but real life is usually more complicated than that. And at some point, we have to stop removing agency from grown women simply because the outcome was painful. Was Landon wrong? In many ways, yes, but was Liz completely powerless? I do not believe so. What stood out to me most was how much of this became public performance. There is a difference between sharing your pain and turning your pain into content. Public figures have the right to speak about their lives, but not every private wound needs to become a public spectacle. That is what I call social media court. One person presents their version of events, the audience delivers a verdict, and the other party is condemned before the full picture is ever examined. That does not mean Landon is above criticism. It means criticism should still be grounded in truth, context, and evidence. What makes the situation interesting is that Liz and Landon appear more similar than people want to admit. Both seem insecure. Both seem immature. Both seem image conscious in different ways. Both appear to have made poor decisions. The difference is presentation. Landon's flaws were visible. Liz's flaws were filtered through branding, beauty, confidence, and a highly curated public image. And that is exactly why people need to be careful with online relationship advice. A polished image is not the same thing as wisdom. A large platform is not the same thing as discernment. And an air of confidence is not the same thing as emotional maturity. If someone is going to teach other people how to live, love, date, heal, or choose partners, then their own life should be examined too. Anybody can give advice. The more important question is whether their actions actually reflect the advice they're giving. It's easy to tell people what they should do. It's much harder to consistently do those things yourself. That's why I pay less attention to what people say and more attention to how they live. Are they following their own principles? Are their decisions aligned with the lessons they're teaching? Does their life produce the outcomes they promise others? Because advice is cheap, integrity is expensive, and the strongest argument for any philosophy is not the words used to defend it, it's the results it produces in the life of the person promoting it. Another aspect of the Wizard Liz saga that I find particularly off-putting is the constant narrative shifting. Over time, the story seems to change depending on what information becomes public. First, there were claims about being married, then there were claims about being separated, then there was the co-parenting narrative, despite evidence suggesting they were still together during periods when the public was being told otherwise. Then came the visa explanation. At a certain point, it becomes difficult to know what is true because the narrative keeps evolving. What I can say with confidence is that there appear to be significant inconsistencies between what was presented publicly and what later came to light. And that's a problem when your platform is built on trust. Because trust is not destroyed by one mistake. Trust is destroyed when people begin to feel that the story is constantly changing, when explanations shift, when timelines don't add up, when new information repeatedly contradicts old information. I also understand why so many people continue to give her the benefit of the doubt. A large portion of her audience appears to come from difficult backgrounds, much like she has described in her own story. When you grow up in a toxic environment, lying, manipulation, gaslighting, inconsistency, and chaos can become normalized. You learn to overlook things you shouldn't overlook. You give people chance after chance because that's what you've always done. But that's exactly why influencers have a responsibility to be careful with their audience. These people are emotionally invested. They care about her. They defend her. They spend hours consuming her content. And yet they cannot actually help her. The relationship is entirely one-sided. What concerns me is that some of that emotional investment now appears to be sustained by a victim narrative that no longer fully aligns with the facts that have emerged. At some point, a person can be both a victim of one situation and responsible for their actions in another. Those two things are not mutually exclusive, and that is where my opinion has changed. Today I see someone who may have started as a victim, but has increasingly become an active participant in shaping, controlling, and benefiting from a narrative that does not always appear consistent with reality. And that distinction matters, because there comes a point where accountability becomes more important than sympathy. Listen to this.
Guys, I have some news for you guys that I really wanted to share. Are you guys ready for the big news? Wait, how many people are watching? Because I want everyone to know this. Let's see.
1,000.
1,000.
No. 1,000.
Okay. So basically,
Are you ready, guys?
are you ready? My visa for the United States got denied.
Let's go.
And
Yeah.
guys,
Everyone's saying yes. Guys.
yes, no, listen. And why
We're
did it get
sarcastic.
denied? Let's talk. We have some information about someone that works at the place.
Here, look.
And they basically said that someone was called and they lied about me and they made sure that my visa got denied. We all know who that guy is. So basically made me unable to travel to the United States, see my son, because they believe that I should only be in the United States if I am married to them. So they basically made me lose $30,000 on lawyers, made me lose my
Great.
visa.
Yeah. Let's go.
This is not how a federal immigration agency works. They can either grant or deny your visa. No one from the inside can give you information about who called, even if a call was made. That is illegal to do. This is an extremely dangerous and uneducated lie. Lying about a government agency is a punishable federal offense. Thousands of people are watching these videos. She could easily be reported for lying about a government agency. If she were ever to face federal charges, she would likely never be granted an American visa. Another thing about her immigration situation is this. If she indeed came to the United States on a fiancé visa, then marriage would have been the legal pathway to remain in the country. That's how the system works. If that's the case, then Landon asking her to marry him could just as easily be interpreted as an attempt to help her maintain legal status and remain in the same country as her son. Telling someone that marriage provides a legal pathway to stay in the country is not automatically blackmail. It's common sense. Instead, everything is framed as though every problem in this story was caused by Landon. Whether Landon is a good person or a bad person is almost irrelevant at this point as far as I'm concerned. It does not change the fact that Liz appears deeply problematic in her own right. What also stands out to me is that she continues blaming the visa situation on Landon, even though he does not work for the government and does not control immigration decisions. At some point, responsibility has to enter the conversation. The government decides who receives a visa. The government decides who is admitted into the country. The government decides who is denied, not Landon. And while publicly criticizing your ex is one thing, repeatedly making negative statements about the country, its institutions, its immigration system, and its people while simultaneously seeking entry into that country seems incredibly counterproductive. Again, thousands of people are watching these videos. People can report content they believe contains misinformation, false statements, or concerning claims. Whether anything comes from that is another matter entirely. But the idea that every setback, every denial, and every consequence can simply be blamed on one man strikes me as absurd. At some point, people have to take responsibility for the choices they make.
Everywhere you go, crackheads that walk up to you, talk
Guys,
to you.
and the crackheads that I've seen and the homeless people there, they're not immigrants or something or foreign people. They're all American people.
They're American people
with American passports.
They're their own people.
Why is no one helping these people?
Yeah.
I don't understand how all of this money that people are paying, the taxes are going to wars and all these things. Help your own people. They're on the streets.
Why are you guys
begging for
paying
money.
taxes? No, seriously, like your tax dollar is going to wars in Palestine, is going to wars in the Middle East, but your people are starving. Your people are going insane, and all of them are addicted to drugs. Like, why don't you guys fix your own country? Why don't these people stand up? Like, genuinely stand up against your government. This is how nasty you are. Nasty, nasty. The United States is the most nasty place I have ever lived. I have not felt safe. I have literally disgusting place. Disgusting.
And everyone we've met there has either stolen money or tried to steal money.
Oh my God, guys, you use people. You take their country. You bomb their country. And then you guys go and try to be racist against them. You guys are nobodies here. Here for all the racist people. Worth absolutely nothing. Trailer fucking trash that you are, yeah?
Calling people racist while simultaneously describing Americans as crackheads, thieves, and generally uneducated is honestly a wild position to take. They later claimed that most Americans are not well-traveled enough to be educated. Yet from what I can tell, they don't appear to have any particular expertise that would justify making such sweeping statements about an entire country. The entire live stream came across as deeply anti-American, and what I find ironic is that this is coming from someone actively seeking a visa to the United States. As an American, I don't appreciate people speaking about my country that way. If every person you've encountered was a crackhead, a thief, or a bad person, that says more about the environments you've chosen to spend time in than it does about 340 million people. The irony is that they criticized Americans for not being exposed to different cultures while demonstrating a remarkably narrow understanding of American culture themselves. America is one of the most geographically, culturally, economically, and ethnically diverse countries in the world. To reduce it to a collection of criminals, addicts, and ignorant people is not serious analysis. It's stereotyping. And if that is genuinely your takeaway after spending time around Americans, then I would question how much of the country you've actually experienced. Another thing people need to understand is that times have changed. Public statements matter. Governments, employers, institutions, and immigration authorities have more access to public information than ever before. Content posted online can be reviewed, archived, shared, and interpreted by people far beyond your immediate audience. Whether someone agrees with those statements or not, repeatedly making broad negative claims about an entire country, its people, and its culture is not a particularly wise thing to do when you're simultaneously asking that country to grant you entry. At the very least, it demonstrates poor judgment. At worst, it creates the impression that you hold genuine hostility toward the very society you are trying to join, even if just to get access to your child.
Taxes. No, seriously, like your tax dollar is going to wars in Palestine, is going to wars in the Middle East. You use people. You take their country. You bomb their country.
And they know a lot of people are going through bad stuff, which is why they're getting 6 months of free therapy to those affected by the war in Israel from BetterHelp. That's right. BetterHelp. Israel declared war, and then they declared a collab with BetterHelp. So when you think BetterHelp, I want you to think of BetterHelp, collaborators with the nation of Israel. BetterHelp and Israel, hand in hand, collaborators.
Make me feel grounded. BetterHelp is sponsor of today's video, and they are on a mission to make therapy way easier. With BetterHelp, therapists will listen, ask questions, and help you see things from a new perspective. BetterHelp makes therapy accessible wherever you are. Down below or visit betterhelp.com/wizardlist to get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp. Because no one should go through anything alone. BetterHelp is here with you.
Another thing I've noticed is what appears to be a lot of virtue signaling. Liz frequently speaks about women's rights in Afghanistan, the war in Palestine, and various social causes, and on the surface that's admirable. There's nothing wrong with caring about those issues. My problem is the apparent inconsistency. If you're going to take strong public positions on moral issues, then your actions should align with those positions. Otherwise, it starts to feel less like conviction and more like branding. At this point, I find it difficult to take anything she says at face value, because the pattern I've observed is one of constant contradictions. The relationship narrative changes, the visa narrative changes, the accountability never comes, and then we're asked to accept the latest version of events without questioning it. For me, credibility is built through consistency. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to get everything right. But your actions should generally reflect the values you claim to hold. And that's where I struggle. Because when I look at the totality of what has been presented publicly, I don't see someone standing firmly on principles. I see someone whose positions seem to shift depending on the circumstances. And when that happens often enough, people naturally begin to question whether the beliefs are genuine or simply convenient.
The Wizard List used to make content how to get a man. When the fuck have I made content on how to get a man? The fuck? All I talk about is how to get away, how to walk away, how to run. I talk about confidence, abuse, money. Like now these dumbass women want to come online and be like, oh, she's male-centered. What? I've been money-centered. I've never gave a fuck about no man. Never. I've always thought, can he provide? Can he bring me money? I've seen men as ATMs my whole life. That's all I've seen in them. And everyone knew that. When I first came on this platform, when I first came online, what did everyone say? She's a narcissist and she's a gold digger. That's what they like. She's an escort. She sleeps with him. But why the f*** are you talking about a grown woman's vagina?
Yeah, why are you thinking
Do you
about
want to lick my
Yeah.
Do you want to lick my pussy? You want to me. Like, is that what you want? Seriously.
What I've noticed is that Liz becomes very emotional whenever people point out her alleged sex work past, and that she did, in fact, give dating advice. Another thing that stood out to me was how comfortable she seemed discussing labels such as gold digger or narcissist, almost as though being called those things validated her success. Personally, I don't think those are labels any woman should aspire to. As for her dating advice, it may not have been traditional dating advice, but a lot of it was very much in the same vein as the sprinkle mindset. By her own admission, she has spoken about using men as ATMs and leveraging men financially. The problem with that mentality is that relationships built on transactions tend to attract transactional people. If you approach someone primarily for money, don't be surprised if they approach you primarily for what they want in return. And in many ways, that's how we arrived at this situation. You cannot spend years publicly telling people that men are primarily a source of money, and then act surprised when you attract men who view women as a source of sex and objectification. People reveal themselves through what they value. Liz also pointed out that women used to call her man-centered. Do you remember the story of how she met Landon? She was going on vacation with her girlfriend, met him at an airport, and invited him on a girls' trip. That's a very male-centered behavior. Getting pregnant within 3 months of knowing him without being married is a male-centered behavior. Following him to the United States and continuing their relationship after the cheating scandal is a male-centered behavior. That's why I find it strange when she becomes offended by that label. You can disagree with the term itself, but people are usually looking at patterns of behavior, not just words. When I look at the major decisions she has publicly shared, many of them appear to have revolved around a man and a relationship. Whether that was right or wrong is a separate discussion, but it does explain why some people came to that conclusion. And that's where I see another contradiction, because the image being sold was one of independence, discernment, and self-mastery. The reality appears far messier, far more emotional, and far more centered around a relationship than many of her followers would like to admit. At some point, we have to stop listening only to what people say and start paying attention to what they do. Actions reveal beliefs far more accurately than words ever will.
Another dumbass take. These women, I'm sorry, they're stupid.
That's what I wanted to say.
I think they're stupid because, like, I've seen a lot of women go online and be like, the content that I and Shera 7 make is the same as Red Pill content. I love Shera. I have always loved Shera.
I watched
love
Shera,
this
Shera
woman.
7.
I think what she has done for women has been more than any woman has ever done. I respect that woman so much. I think she is very, very wise.
So in one breath, Liz says she doesn't give dating advice, and in the next, she agrees that she gives similar advice to Shera, and goes on to praise her. The fact that her content, much like Shera's, often resembles a female version of red pill ideology is something I discussed earlier in this video. I've already covered the similarities and why I believe that type of advice can be dangerous, so I won't spend too much time repeating it here. What I will say is this. In my very first video about Liz, I pointed out that much of her content felt like repackaged Shera's advice for a younger, more aesthetically driven audience. So it doesn't surprise me at all that she praises Shera. In fact, Liz said that Shera has done more for women than almost any other woman. But that raises an important question. What exactly has that advice done for Liz? When we look at the outcome of her own relationship, are we looking at a success story of the sprinkle philosophy, or are we looking at a cautionary tale? Because if the purpose of advice is to produce better outcomes, then eventually we have to evaluate the results. Not the branding, not the aesthetics, not the followers, not the motivational quotes, the results. And when I look at the situation objectively, I don't see evidence that these teachings led to peace, stability, discernment, or a healthy relationship. I see chaos, I see poor decisions, I see ignored red flags, I see a relationship that imploded in public. You may come to a different conclusion, but based on the outcome, I think it's fair to ask whether this is really a success story at all. I'll let you be the judge.
Let these men be single parents. We need to stop doing what our mother has done, what our grandmother has done. My mother stayed for 25 years with a man, let herself get abused because she was scared of the children being taken. So guess what? How do we break this whole cycle that our ancestors all had to repeat? We break it by saying it ends with us. Let's make this world full of single dads.
Instead of telling women to make this world full of single dads, perhaps the advice should be different. Maybe the lesson is not to move so fast. Maybe the lesson is not to be blinded by money. Maybe the lesson is not to have a child in a country where your legal status is uncertain. Maybe the lesson is not to spend years publicly proclaiming that men are primarily a source of money and then act shocked when you attract people with unhealthy intentions. And if what you truly wanted was marriage, which If we're being honest, I suspect Liz did. Otherwise, she would not have publicly introduced Landon as her husband before they were even married. Then perhaps the lesson is that wanting marriage is not the problem. Ignoring red flags in pursuit of it is. What I think would be far more powerful than the bravado is accountability. Just say, I messed up. I moved too fast. I ignored things I shouldn't have ignored. I made mistakes. There is no shame in that. The older you get, the more you realize that there is a difference between advice and experience. You can give your thoughts, you can give your opinions, you can share your story, but advice is different. Advice implies a level of wisdom, discernment, and demonstrated success that not everyone possesses. And after article, controversy after controversy becomes public, people naturally begin to question whether someone is truly qualified to advise others. At some point, you have to stop trying to be something you're not. Personally, I think Liz would be far more credible if she stopped positioning herself as someone with answers and instead positioned herself as someone sharing lessons learned through experience. Because experience can teach people, mistakes can teach people, failure can teach people, but only when you're honest about what actually happened. Yet she continues to teach lessons while remaining the most unqualified person to do so. The most dangerous part about online relationship gurus is not the advice itself, it's the fact that younger generations are looking up to them. They repost the quotes, they share the clips, they make videos repeating the same talking points to their own smaller audiences. That's actually how influence spreads, and in many ways that's how Liz herself got started. As I said earlier, much of her content felt like a younger, more aesthetically pleasing Gen Z version of ideas that already existed. The packaging changed, but many of the underlying messages remained the same. Then thousands of young women adopted those messages and began repeating them as though they were universal truths. The problem is that the predator men are not rare. They are everywhere. And they don't only target large influencers. They target smaller creators, aspiring influencers, Instagram models, and everyday women too. Once you publicly position yourself as someone whose primary goal is money, status, luxury, or provision, certain types of people will inevitably take notice. The offer will come. The attention will come. The opportunities will come. But the real question is whether those opportunities are good for you. Because when money becomes the primary objective, discernment often becomes secondary. And that is where people get into trouble. When the goal is no longer character, compatibility, values, stability, or emotional health, but simply securing the highest bidder, it becomes much harder to recognize danger when it presents itself. After all, if money is the objective, then almost anything can be rationalized. And before long, a person can find themselves trapped in a situation they never would have accepted had money not been the deciding factor. Personally, I believe that's exactly what happened to Ashlee Janae. The offer was made, and that offer was accepted, but the price ended up being far greater than anyone could have imagined. Let's talk about Ashlee. When news of Ashlee's death spread online, I initially wanted to cover the story, but I quickly changed my mind as I watched more and more creators capitalize on such a sensitive situation, making several videos while her remains had not even been transported back to the United States. So far, I've only covered one tragic case like this, and I made sure to wait until the person had been laid to rest and properly honored by their family. That was the story of Valeria Marquez. As a creator, I understand that timing matters. I understand that YouTube rewards being first. But there comes a point where integrity should matter more than a paycheck. Perhaps some creators will always choose a YouTube check over compassion. I won't. We can't forget that these were real people with parents, siblings, children, and loved ones. While their families are still trying to process an unimaginable loss, they now also have to watch strangers on the internet dissect, speculate about, and in Ashlee's case, even speak negatively about someone whose body had not yet even been brought home and laid to rest. Personally, I think some stories deserve patience. Ashlee Janae was a 31-year-old lifestyle influencer who tragically lost her life after reportedly taking her own life on April 9, 2026, during a luxury vacation in Zanzibar, Tanzania. Just days after getting engaged to her fiancé, Joe McCann. The couple traveled to Zanzibar to celebrate her birthday and went on a safari, where McCann proposed. Just days after the engagement, the couple reportedly had a volatile argument, prompting staff at the Zuri Zanzibar resort to separate them into different rooms for their safety. On April 8th, a hotel attendant conducting routine checks entered Ashlee's room with a master key and found her unresponsive in the closet using a robe belt. She was rushed to the hospital but sadly passed away the following day. Following an investigation that included witness statements and an examination of her electronic devices, the Zanzibar police force concluded that she had taken her own life. Investigators reportedly found messages on her phone describing ongoing struggles in her personal life, as well as a ChatGPT search from about a month earlier, asking how much Valium could be lethal. Although her fiancé was briefly questioned and his travel documents were temporarily withheld during the investigation, police did not accuse him of any wrongdoing. McCann, who was reportedly not permitted to attend her funeral in New Jersey, later publicly expressed his devastation and announced plans to launch a nonprofit foundation in her honor. Ashlee's fiancé, crypto investor and Asymmetric CEO, Joe McCann, has an estimated net worth of roughly $45 million, although estimates vary and are difficult to independently verify. His wealth has been attributed to his career in institutional cryptocurrency investing and his leadership of Asymmetric, a hedge fund and venture firm that previously attracted high-profile backers, including Mark Andreessen. However, McCann's financial and professional challenges came into public view throughout 2025 and 2026. McCann, the founder and CEO of Asymmetric, faced significant setbacks when his Asymmetric Liquid Alpha Fund reportedly suffered major losses, with some reports and industry discussions suggesting declines of as much as 78% during 2025. Following those losses, McCann announced that the Asymmetric Liquid Alpha Fund would be wound down in late 2025, marking a major turning point for the firm. When I heard that Joe McCann was involved in crypto, my mind immediately went to the murky reality that many high-profile figures in the crypto industry have found themselves in. Stay with me for a moment because this will make sense. I've followed the crypto space for years. I invested in cryptocurrency myself and was always interested in developments surrounding the industry. My enthusiasm cooled considerably after feeling burned after the NFT market crash in 2022, but I've continued paying attention to major stories. One pattern that has always stood out to me is the number of high-profile crypto founders and executives whose lives ended under unusual or tragic circumstances. For example, Faruk Fatih Özer, founder of the Turkish crypto exchange Thodex, after the exchange collapsed in one of the largest crypto scandals in history, with investor losses estimated $2 billion, Özer was extradited back to Turkey, convicted of fraud, and sentenced to more than 11,000 years in prison. He was later found unalived in his prison cell in 2025. His passing prompted renewed public discussion about the case. Konstantin Galish, Ukrainian crypto entrepreneur and co-founder of Cryptology Key. In 2025, Galish was found unalived in his Lamborghini after suffering significant financial losses during a major crypto market crash. Authorities investigated the circumstances, with reports indicating they were treating the case as a possible self-unaliving. No verified public estimate of his personal net worth has been established. Dr. John Forsyth, emergency room physician, early Bitcoin millionaire, and co-founder of OnfoCoin. Forbes previously referred to him as a Bitcoin millionaire. After disappearing in Missouri, he was found unalived in 2023 with a gunshot wound. Authorities stated they found no evidence of foul play. Bob Lee, creator of Cash App, former CTO of Square, now Block, and chief product officer at MobileCoin. Although primarily known as a technology executive rather than a crypto founder, he was deeply involved in the digital asset industry. Lee, whose net worth was estimated in the tens of millions of dollars, was unalived in 2023 after being stabbed in San Francisco. Tiantian Kullander, co-founder of Amber Group. Amber had reached an estimated valuation of $3 billion, although that was the company's valuation rather than Kullander's personal wealth. He was found unalived in his sleep in 2022. And this is where the string of cases becomes especially eerie. Nikolai Mushigian, co-founder of MakerDAO and one of the architects behind the DAI stablecoin. Just hours after posting alarming messages online claiming that intelligence agencies were targeting him, Mushigian was found unalived after drowning in Puerto Rico in 2022. Authorities found no evidence of foul play, but the timing fueled years of speculation within the crypto community. Public estimates of his personal net worth vary widely and have never been reliably verified. Vyacheslav Taran, founder of Forex Club and president of Libertex Group, a wealthy Russian entrepreneur whose fortune was estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars, Taran was unalived in a helicopter crash near the French-Italian border in 2022. There are many more, but of course, perhaps the most famous case of all, Gerald Cotton, founder and CEO of Quadriga CX, Canada's largest cryptocurrency exchange at the time. Cotton was found unalived in 2018 while traveling in India. His passing left approximately 115,000 customers unable to access roughly $190 million in crypto assets because he was reportedly the only person with access to the exchange's private keys. Later investigations concluded that Quadriga CX had been operating as a fraudulent scheme long before his passing. I'm not saying these cases are connected. I'm saying the crypto industry has repeatedly produced stories involving enormous sums of money, financial collapses, criminal investigations, and high-profile tragedies. And that's important context for understanding why my attention was immediately drawn to Joe McCann's involvement in crypto space. Now, considering everything I've discussed about the high-profile tragedies in the crypto industry, let's consider a completely fictional scenario. This is a hypothetical story based on speculation, not fact. We've talked for a long time on this channel about allegations involving private clubs and powerful networks in entertainment, politics, and other industries. Now imagine, purely as a thought experiment, that similar exclusive circles existed within the cryptocurrency world. Imagine that once someone reaches a certain level of wealth and influence in that industry, they are approached by powerful people and believe they have to make impossible choices in order to remain successful. Now let's remove all real names from this discussion. Let's imagine a fictional scenario in which a young woman meets a wealthy tech entrepreneur and begins a relationship with him. At first, everything appears perfect. As time goes on, however, the entrepreneur becomes involved with increasingly dangerous people and questionable circles. Now imagine that he begins to believe he has to choose between protecting himself, protecting his family, or sacrificing someone else close to him. In a fictional story like that, the person with the least power would often become the most vulnerable. Again, I want to emphasize that this is a hypothetical scenario meant to illustrate how power, money, and influence can create moral dilemmas in fiction. It is not a claim about any real person or any actual events. The reason I use that illustration is to encourage young women to think beyond the lifestyle being presented. Many times when you're dealing with men who have significant money, influence, or power, you don't really know the world they're operating in. You don't know the connections they have. You don't know the pressures they're under. You don't know the kinds of people they associate with. And you certainly don't know what compromises they may or may not have made to build or maintain that position. That's why I believe discernment is so important. Wealth alone tells you very little about a person's character. Now, I also want to touch on something from a spiritual perspective. Personally, some high-profile tragedies strike me as having what I would describe as a ritualistic tone. To be clear, that is my interpretation. It is not something I can prove. As I discussed in the Valeria Marquez case, whenever an event captures the attention of millions of people and produces an enormous wave of fear, grief, outrage, speculation, and emotional turmoil, I believe there is also a spiritual dimension worth considering. Scripture teaches that our battle is not merely against flesh and blood, but against spiritual forces. I believe the enemy seeks to spread fear, despair, division, and hopelessness wherever possible. Highly publicized tragedies often leave millions of people emotionally shaken at the same time. They dominate the news cycle, consume social media, and fill people with grief, anxiety, anger, and confusion. From my perspective, that kind of collective emotional response can become fertile ground for spiritual darkness if people allow fear to consume them. That doesn't mean every tragedy is orchestrated or ritualistic. I don't have evidence to make that claim. It simply means that as Christians, we should be spiritually discerning. We shouldn't become fascinated with darkness, but neither should we ignore the possibility that evil can exploit moments of widespread fear and suffering. And that's ultimately my point. My concern isn't simply who has money or power. My concern is that many young women are chasing lifestyles without asking deeper questions about the people behind them. Discernment has to come before desire. Otherwise, you may find yourself pursuing a dream without understanding the cost that could come with it. As I've said before, but I think it's worth repeating, when you publicly position yourself as a woman who can be bought, you may attract predators. People can recognize your light, your energy, and your vulnerabilities. I believe there are individuals who will exploit those vulnerabilities for their own gain. Spiritually speaking, I believe some people are willing to sacrifice almost anything in pursuit of power, money, or influence. That's why I've said in many of my videos, don't publicly announce whether you're chasing the sprinkle mindset or whether you agree with Wizard Liz or similar creators. In my opinion, those messages can place a target on your back. Notice how many of these same women now say they never want to date again. I don't believe it's because they never wanted love or companionship. I believe it's because the choices they made severely compromised their chances of finding healthy relationships, and misery loves company. People who are deeply wounded often end up encouraging others down the very path that wounded them. So don't build your identity around their philosophy. Don't constantly repost their clips. Don't make their worldview your worldview. Their story is not your story. There is nothing wrong with wanting a husband who provides. There is nothing wrong with desiring a peaceful, stable life. And if that is God's will for your life, He is fully capable of bringing the right person into your path. But I don't believe that constantly talking about the soft life, advertising that money is your priority, or broadcasting that you're looking for a wealthy man increases your chances. I believe it can do the opposite. It can attract the wrong kind of attention from the wrong kind of people. and that is a risk I don't think enough young women are being warned about. Another thing I keep coming back to when I think about the crypto executives I mentioned is this. Money is never truly lost. It is redistributed. Now, what I'm about to say is my personal opinion and speculation. I don't believe the people we see at the top of the financial world necessarily control all of the wealth they appear to have. The other day, my husband told me Elon Musk was now worth over $1 trillion, and my response was, I hope you realize that's not really his money. Again, this is my opinion. I believe there are people with far greater financial influence operating behind the scenes, people the public will likely never know by name. The faces we see on television, whether they're celebrities, politicians, tech founders, or billionaires like Jeff Bezos, are the public-facing figures. The people who truly control global capital, in my view, are far less visible. And if that is true, then wealth at that level may come with expectations, obligations, or compromises that ordinary people never see. Just as many people have long alleged that certain figures in entertainment, sports, and politics must become part of exclusive circles to reach the highest levels of success, I believe similar allegations exist in the world of technology and cryptocurrency. Whether those allegations are true is something I cannot prove. But I do believe one principle remains true. Nothing is free. The higher someone climbs, the more important it becomes to ask not only what they gained, but what it may have cost them to get there. Now, back to Joe McCann. Joe has recently come out with a series of public statements claiming that Ashlee struggled with severe mental health issues. He has also alleged that her family dynamics may have played a role, stating that she did not grow up in a stable home after both of her parents remarried. In addition, he shared what he says are screenshots of Ashlee's ChatGPT history, in which she allegedly asked about coping with emotional struggles, and at one point how much Valium could be lethal. He also released numerous screenshots of text messages between them, along with photos that he says show Ashlee in emotional distress. Now, I'm not going to say whether any of those materials are authentic because I simply can't verify that. What I will say is this. When you live with someone and have access to their phone, as Joe has publicly claimed he did, you also have access to many aspects of their digital life. That includes messages, apps, and potentially even their ChatGPT history. I'm not saying that's what happened here. I'm simply pointing out that access to someone's device means it's technically possible to interact with information on that device. That's a general observation, not an accusation against anyone in this case. Likewise, with the advances in artificial intelligence, image editing, and digital manipulation, it has become increasingly difficult for the public to determine what is authentic simply by looking at screenshots or photographs online. Again, I'm not accusing anyone of fabricating evidence. I'm simply acknowledging the reality that digital content is much harder to authenticate than it used to be. Another thing that stood out to me was Joe's online activity during that time. While he has stated that he was occupied arranging emergency medical transport, speaking with local doctors, and dealing with an unimaginable crisis, people have also pointed out that his X account appeared to continue posting and reposting work-related content around that same period. I don't know who made those posts or under what circumstances. I simply find the timing unusual. That is my observation, not an accusation. Since then, Joe has participated in multiple interviews explaining his side of the story and discussing Ashlee's mental health in considerable detail, sharing deeply personal information that Ashlee herself is no longer here to respond to or clarify. From my perspective, that raises difficult ethical questions. He has also reportedly hired a public relations team to help manage his public communications and online reputation. Most recently, Joe announced plans to establish a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to preventing self-harm and supporting people experiencing self-harm thoughts. Of course, raising awareness for mental health is a worthwhile goal, but there are already many organizations doing important work in that space, so donating to such an organization would have sufficed. Taken together, however, the interviews, the release of private messages, the discussions of Ashlee's mental health, the public relations efforts, and the announcement of a foundation, I personally came away feeling uneasy. Those are my observations. They are not conclusions about anyone's guilt or innocence. Unlike Shera or Wizard Liz, Ashlee wasn't building a platform around this ideology or teaching other women to live this way. From everything that was publicly shared, she appeared to be someone who was simply hopeful for a better future. That's an important distinction. She wasn't selling a philosophy. She wasn't encouraging millions of women to follow in her footsteps. She was living her own life and making her own choices. For that reason, I don't think we should judge her as harshly. When I look at Ashlee's story, I don't see someone who got what she deserved. I see a cautionary tale. If anything, I think she became a victim of the very mindset that has been promoted online for years. The sprinkle philosophy tells women that the answer to insecurity, instability, or financial struggle is to find a wealthy provider. It teaches women to prioritize provision above almost everything else. But what often gets left out is that wealth does not tell you anything about a person's character, emotional stability, integrity, or the world they operate in. Money is not discernment. Money is not love. That's why I believe Ashlee's story should evoke compassion, not mockery. I've seen people online saying she should have known better, that she was chasing money, and that she got what she deserved. I completely reject that way of thinking. Even if someone made poor decisions, that does not mean they deserve tragedy. Poor judgment is not a justification for cruelty. If anything, stories like Ashlee's should remind us how vulnerable people can become when they're chasing what they believe will finally make them feel safe. To me, Ashlee represents what can happen when the dream becomes more important than discernment. She isn't someone I look at with condemnation. She's someone I look at with sadness, because I don't think she was ultimately looking for money. I think she was looking for security. And those are two very different things. That is why I believe young women need to hear a different message. Instead of asking, how do I attract the richest man possible? The question should be, how do I recognize someone who is emotionally healthy, trustworthy, and safe? Those questions may not go viral on social media, but they have a much better chance of protecting your future. And that's why, to me, Ashlee's story is not one of shame, it's one of warning. Another thing that felt especially eerie to me in Ashlee's case was the number of people who had been speaking negative words over her life for years. Whenever she posted what appeared to be happy milestones in her relationship, there were people in the comments saying things like, "Joe is going to unalive you," or "You're in danger." Those comments remained on many of her posts instead of being deleted. There is an important distinction between thought forms, servitors, and familiar spirits. A thought form is created when an idea is repeated with enough emotion, intention, and collective agreement. One negative comment may be insignificant, but when hundreds of people repeatedly speak the same outcome over one person's life, those thoughts begin to take on a spiritual existence of their own. The thought form itself is considered passive. It is simply a spiritual pattern or blueprint. The next stage is a servitor. A servitor exists to sustain that thought form, to continually feed it, reinforce it, and direct more attention and emotional energy toward it. Finally comes the familiar spirit. Unlike a thought form or servitor, a familiar spirit is an actual demonic spirit with intelligence and intent. Its purpose is to bring that established pattern into physical reality. But familiar spirits do not operate independently. They work through people. They look for someone nearby who has spiritual openings through unforgiveness, bitterness, jealousy, pride, habitual sin, addiction, hatred, or other vulnerabilities. Once they find agreement, they influence human decisions so that what began as a repeated idea can eventually manifest through someone's actions. The progression looks like this. A repeated curse becomes a thought form. The thought form is sustained by a servitor. The servitor seeks agreement with a familiar spirit. The familiar spirit then works through a human being willing or vulnerable enough to carry out the pattern. Whether someone believes this framework or not, it helps explain why we should place importance on guarding what is repeatedly spoken over another person's life. Applied to situations like Ashlee's, some would interpret the constant flood of comments predicting tragedy not merely as internet negativity, but as the formation of a collective spiritual narrative. The concern is not that words magically create reality on their own, but that repeated agreement with darkness creates a spiritual environment that familiar spirits seek to exploit through human beings. That is one reason stories like Ashlee's strike me as having a ritualistic tone. Again, I am not saying this is what happened in Ashlee's case. I cannot prove that. I am simply explaining a spiritual framework. From this perspective, cases that generate massive amounts of collective fear, grief, speculation, and dark expectation can feel spiritually significant. Whether Ashlee's case had any spiritual dimension beyond what we can see, I cannot know. But I do believe that darkness seeks agreement. And when many people emotionally fixate on one person, constantly speaking fear, destruction, or tragedy over their life, I believe that is spiritual sabotage. Whether someone accepts that spiritual framework or not, it leads me to one final thought. If you believe that darkness operates through agreement, repeated curses, and familiar spirits working through vulnerable people, then situations like this can be viewed as more than isolated tragedies. From that perspective, what happened could be understood as a form of spiritual sabotage, not necessarily because one person planned it, but because countless negative declarations, fear, despair, unhealthy relationships, open spiritual doors, and human choices all converged into one devastating outcome. The enemy's goal has always been to steal, kill, and destroy. He looks for opportunities, vulnerabilities, and agreement. He works through people, through sin, through deception, through trauma, and through brokenness to accomplish his purposes. That is why I believe discernment is so important. Not just financial discernment, not just relationship discernment, spiritual discernment, because sometimes the greatest battle isn't the one you can see. It's the one taking place behind the scenes. And if Ashlee's story teaches us anything, perhaps it's that the real battle was never just physical. Perhaps it was spiritual all along. That brings me to another similar case, Valeria Marquez. Valeria repeatedly expressed fear that her ex-boyfriend was going to unalive her. On multiple occasions, she publicly said that if anything ever happened to her, people should look at her ex. She also spoke about seeing unfamiliar trucks around her home and salon, asking, "Did they come here to unalive me?" Even on the day of her passing, Valeria questioned the gift she was expecting and openly wondered during her livestream whether the people coming were there to unalive her or kidnap her. Whether those fears were justified or not isn't the point I'm making here. From the spiritual framework I've been discussing, repeatedly speaking a specific outcome over your own life can reinforce a thought form. When that same narrative is echoed by thousands of followers, it can become even more powerful through collective agreement. In many spiritual traditions, self-spoken curses are considered the most powerful because they come from the person's own agreement. The idea is that when you repeatedly declare something negative over your own life, you are no longer just hearing a curse from someone else, you are participating in it yourself. Valeria had hundreds of thousands of followers, and many people became emotionally invested in that narrative. Then, tragically, she was unalived during a live stream on TikTok. Again, I am not saying that her words caused what happened. I'm saying that, from a spiritual perspective, these cases remind me why we should be careful about the narratives we continually speak over ourselves. Whether the danger comes from spiritual warfare, human evil, or both, constantly living under the expectation of tragedy is not something to normalize. If you believe that words carry spiritual weight, then the words we speak over our own lives may be the ones we should guard most carefully.
She is clearly very nervous, and on several occasions she even says things like, "They're going to take my life, they're going to abduct me," which is a term that unfortunately we've already normalized. As she starts to experience something like, I don't know whether to call it a premonition, a sixth sense. Chemically speaking, does something happen when we're in a heightened state of alert? Does our body somehow anticipate that something is going to happen? That's a very good question. From my perspective, from a medical and criminological standpoint, I don't think it's so much that she was having a premonition. Rather, I'm almost certain, based on how the protocol addresses femicide, that this young woman was already being threatened. Most likely, she had already been experiencing gender-based violence, probably multiple threats for months or weeks. It's even possible that she told her romantic partner that she wanted to separate because she likely knew that he wasn't involved in lawful activities or ethical activities, so to speak. So she decides to leave that place or that relationship. And based on how the media is handling it, he is probably linked to a criminal group. These groups are characterized by the idea that you can leave, but you'll leave feet first. This is how many aggressors frame their threats. He likely told her, yes, you can leave, but you already know the cost. You're leaving, but to the other side, because you're not going to leave me. That's the kind of intimidation they use. You're going to leave me, you'll remember me. You'll remember your family. You'll remember your children. All this is often used to subjugate her once again. There's even an author named Urra who talks about a very dangerous window of time when a couple separates, because that's when months of stalking often follow. Once the aggressor loses control and power over her, that's when the threats begin. If you don't come back, I'll plant rugs on your father. If you don't come back, your children will pay for it. I know where you live. They send photos of the children leaving school, of the mother walking down the street, the siblings, constant surveillance. So very likely, this young woman was already receiving threats. She already had that fear, that anxiety, so much so that even going out in public felt dangerous. It's probably all on her phone. And we're going to ask Professor Carlos whether this information can be used as part of the investigation, because I'm almost certain that those threats are documented there and that she knew it. That's why she had already had this fear, this adrenaline release, this constant state of alert, because she was afraid that something would happen to her or to her family. These were the screenshots that Valeria posted. This is from her Instagram page. This was on February 9th. And this says, it was the actual person that I was dating, like my actual partner, the person that I lived with. That's why I said he's my ex. I hold him responsible for anything that happens to me or my family, that person, even if I have to leave the city. And then here, this is whenever she got kicked out of this bar, because he basically made some calls. From what I understand, he made some calls and they told her, please leave because you don't know how he gets. I don't want any problems with him. And it's all like pointing back to the same guy. This is actual text message from him on her WhatsApp that basically says, so you'll learn to listen to me. You don't know my worst side. And then she tells him to fuck off. And he said, and I don't want to have to show you. She said, you'll remember me. And then he said, you're so comfortable all day sending me and telling me to fuck off. And all day just having fun. Ha ha ha. Like, no mames. And no mames is like a term that they would use for disbelief. Like, are you kidding me? Or are you serious? Or like, be so fucking for real. That type of expression when they say like, no mames. And then it says, you should have some shame of the things. Like, have some shame about the things you do. You make me do things that I don't want to do.
One of two reasons. So I have two theories. I think the one that sticks out to me the most is she was probably dating the wrong guys. She didn't grow up wealthy. She came from very humble beginnings. And I think that, she was a beautiful girl and she used that to her advantage. Dated guys who were cartel associates, part of organized crime, and she pissed someone off. She had already posted previously on her Instagram screenshots of messages with a boyfriend where he was threatening to kill her and said, you've never seen me mad and you don't want to see me mad, but you're going to force me to do something I don't want to do. And she posted and said, if something happens to me or my family, it's this guy. So that's what I think happened, is that she broke up with a guy who had a very fragile ego, or she did him dirty in some way in terms of their relationship, and he sought revenge. And he did it publicly to send a message. It makes sense to do it on live. This is what happens if you're gonna fuck with me or make a fool of me. You die.
Since Valeria's passing, her friend Vivian has often been blamed online for the tragedy. Many people speculated that she performed a destiny swap and even orchestrated Valeria's removal. To support those claims, they circulated clips from Valeria's live streams. In one live stream, Vivian asked to borrow a pair of Valeria's underwear because it appeared she had spent the night there and needed a clean pair. People immediately claimed she wanted the underwear for black magic. Anyone familiar with occult practices knows that, according to those beliefs, worn underwear would be considered far more valuable because it carries a person's DNA. If Vivian had truly intended to perform something like a destiny swap, why would she ask for a clean pair on a live stream in front of thousands of people instead of quietly taking a worn pair that Valeria would likely never notice? To me, that wouldn't make sense. It would make her the dumbest destiny swapper in history by openly compromising herself. Another clip that circulated widely online involved both Valeria and Vivian during a live stream. Valeria was holding a large stuffed plush toy and joked that it had never been washed or cleaned and that it smelled like shit. Vivian immediately made a disgusted facial expression. People clipped only Vivian's reaction and used it as evidence that she secretly hated Valeria, leaving out the context of what Valeria had actually said. Without that context, viewers were encouraged to interpret the clip in a completely different way. There were other videos that some people pointed to as examples of microaggressions or moments where Vivian appeared annoyed with Valeria. However, most of those clips were never translated into English, meaning many international viewers were forming strong opinions without understanding the full conversation or cultural context. There were also rumors that Vivian opened a salon after Valeria's passing, and even offered a Valeria special for 666 pesos. That claim turned out to be completely fabricated. Then other creators claimed Vivian had purchased Valeria's apartment in Mexico City along with all of her belongings. Again, that isn't supported by the available facts. First, these women were from Jalisco, Guadalajara, not Mexico City. Those are entirely different places, separated by roughly 6 hours of travel. I find it surprising how confidently some creators make factual claims without taking a few minutes to verify basic information, even something as simple as geography. Second, Valeria never owned the apartment. It was a rental. Following her passing, the property reportedly struggled to attract new tenants because her case became an international story. And many people in Mexico are superstitious about renting a place associated with such a tragedy. As for her personal belongings, they were returned to her family. Vivian did not inherit them. Another rumor was that Vivian changed her username to Barbie V immediately after Valeria's passing in an attempt to imitate or replace her. Again, that turned out to be false. Her account was already named Barbie V before Valeria's passing. In fact, during one of Valeria's live streams, Vivian herself shared her username after a viewer asked for it. After the tragedy, Vivian later changed her username to Doll Viv, which, from the outside looking in, appeared to be an attempt to distance herself from the online backlash and constant accusations. She also dyed her hair auburn, seemingly to separate her appearance from Valeria's. She later returned to blonde but has publicly expressed that she would like to go back to auburn. People also claimed that Vivian underwent reconstructive surgery to look exactly like Valeria. But when you actually look at the publicly available videos of Vivian from before and during her friendship with Valeria, that claim doesn't hold up. You can clearly see that the biggest changes were cosmetic. She dyed her hair blonde, wore colored contact lenses, and appeared to get lip filler. Those are common aesthetic procedures and are a far cry from reconstructive facial surgery. To me, this is another example of how quickly false narratives can spread online. Once people become convinced of a particular story, they often stop checking whether the timeline or the facts actually support it. Digging deeper, I found something much darker. Both Valeria and Vivian were allegedly involved with high-ranking men tied to the Jalisco New Generation cartel. It's been rumored they were even seeing the same man, someone powerful, who financially supported Valeria. He reportedly paid for her numerous cosmetic surgeries, rib removal, liposuction, fat transfers to her hips and buttocks, buccal fat removal, breast augmentation, and she has also mentioned she was getting ready for yet another surgery to move her breast implants under the muscle, which would look more natural because they were sitting above the muscle. Valeria even admitted all her surgeries herself in this video.
Tengo los senos, tengo lipo, tengo luxación de costillas, tengo lipotransferencias a cadera y glúteo, la bichectomía y ya. Me quiero cambiar los implantes. Yo tengo mis implantes, no los tengo por debajo del músculo, yo los quiero debajo del músculo, entonces nada más me voy a cambiar.
She said she spent large amounts monthly just on hair color and other beauty maintenance like lip fillers, eyelashes, nails, etc. That same cartel-affiliated man supposedly funded her lifestyle, her car, her penthouse, and the beauty salon she opened last year. Now here's an important point. When a man invests in you, especially in significant ways, he often expects something in return. And if that man is connected to the underworld, trust me, he doesn't see you as a partner. He sees you as property. But we'll circle back to that. For now, let's talk about Vivian. Many have pointed out how Vivian appeared to morph into Valeria, lightening her hair, altering her appearance. It's important to understand the beauty standard in Jalisco. European features, fair skin, light eyes, and blonde or light brown hair are idolized. Valeria, originally from Jalisco, was born with naturally blonde hair and blue eyes. As she got older, her hair darkened, so she began dyeing it blonde, hence the brown roots often visible in photos. It makes you wonder, were both girls simply adapting to the Jalisco beauty ideal? Or was Vivian trying to become Valeria specifically? Or any girl who embodied the Jalisco aesthetic? I found several of Vivian's posts where she used beauty filters on every girl she hung out with. You can clearly see the filter shift with each new face. She was bragging that all her friends were beautiful, curating this image of effortless perfection. She also posted things like, when Valeria and I are around, no other girl stands a chance, just like she did in this video. It felt like she was desperately trying to be seen as the Gurita of Jalisco. As many of you know, I often talk about beauty, identity, and destiny swaps on this channel. In fact, my very first video, back in December 2024, was about a destiny swap. I've since removed it, and while this case looks like an envious friend stealing a destiny, my spirit tells me no. This wasn't a destiny swap. Vivian was definitely jealous of Valeria. That much is clear. But would she have acted on that jealousy on her own? I don't believe so. I believe she was ordered to by the cartel. I also get the sense that she has unresolved romantic feelings for Valeria, an intense mix of love and resentment that she hasn't fully come to terms with. This wasn't just personal, this was a cartel-sanctioned ritualistic sacrifice. Were her friends Vivian and Erica involved? Yes, but not in the way most people think. When you're entangled with the cartel, you don't make your own decisions. You follow instructions, you play the part they assign you, or you pay the price. Let me explain. The cartel operates not only as a powerful criminal enterprise, but also as a deeply satanic organization, driven by bloodshed, fear, and spiritual corruption. Allegedly, it's also the shadow power behind the government. In Mexico, nothing moves without their say-so. They run everything from the streets to the state. I came across an article published on FBI.gov from 2014 that dives into ritualistic sacrifices inspired by Santa Muerte, carried out by cartel members. It's a disturbing but fascinating read that sheds light on the spiritual darkness fueling some of these crimes. If you're interested, here you can see the title, but I've also summarized the key points for you. This article explores the dark spiritual dimension of Mexico's narcotics wars, particularly the rise of Santa Muerte, holy death worship among drug cartels and gangs. This criminalized variant of the folk saint cult has become increasingly associated with ritualistic violence, including human sacrifices. Santa Muerte, depicted as a skeletal, non-judgmental figure resembling the Grim Reaper, appeals to those living in desperate, lawless conditions and offers protection, wealth, and power in return for offerings, sometimes as extreme as human heads. While Santa Muerte has benign folk Catholic roots among poor and marginalized populations, a darker narco-cultural version has emerged. This form merges spirituality with violent criminality, rationalizing murder and torture as acts of devotion. Cartel members often pray for protection, victory, or revenge through rituals involving candle magic, herbs, oils, and blood. Believing Santa Muerte requires strict ceremonial adherence and punishes those who fail. The article warns U.S. law enforcement of the potential for this violence and belief system to cross into the United States. It emphasizes the need to distinguish between inspired sacrifices, which mimic cultural actions for utilitarian reasons, and ritualized sacrifices, driven by deep belief systems or psychological compulsion, whether by individuals, signatures, or groups' organized rites. Dr. Bunker, the author, argues that this spiritual insurgency adds a dangerous layer to criminal behavior, merging religious fervor with brutal violence, complicating how authorities must understand and combat such crimes.
There's a lot of evil in Mexico, a lot of demonic evil. For those who don't know, just the past few weeks, there was a camp found in Jalisco where in this camp people were lured in with fake job opportunities and they were deceived. They were told that they were gonna go there for a better opportunity for them to provide for their families, but instead they were kidnapped into this camp and they were not allowed to leave. This camp was owned by the cartels, by the narcos, and the stuff that they found here this past few weeks is really disturbing and disgusting, where a lot of child sacrifice were done, a lot of demonic activities such as witchcraft, santeria, and even some altars to the Santa Muerte that were found in here. They would torture children, they would torture women, they would torture men, they would make people eat human flesh. And if you haven't woken up yet, this is a spiritual world where it's a warfare between good and evil. That our battle is not against flesh nor blood, but it's against principalities. It's against the God of this world, Satan. And the principality that is over Jalisco, the principality that is over Mexico is death. Santa Muerte is not your friend, it is a demon. And no government, no president will ever bring us justice. Only Jesus Christ himself will bring judgment upon the nations and upon the government, the corrupted government. Praying for those families, praying for those who justice have not been served to them yet. But one day, justice will come. Justice will come.
These were found in bags, discarded in a ravine. Grisly murders that have shocked even Mexicans weary of years of rampant violence, often connected to drug cartels. Investigators say at least 45 bags were found containing human remains outside Guadalajara, Mexico. Some of the bags had broken open.
All the bags that we found are closed and obviously taped, packed. We found some segments on the precipice, ravine, that we believe that when they were placed or thrown there, some bags must have torn, and that's how we found some segments. In a preliminary manner, we can say that there are female and male bodies. but we need to wait for the Institute to confirm.
Valeria had a statue of Santa Muerte in her home, wore a Santa Muerte bracelet, and even had a screensaver of the figure. Whether this was due to her affiliation with the cartel or her personal belief system remains unclear, but it definitely sparked conversation. Many people, especially within the Mexican community, had a lot to say about it. On Mexican TikTok, many speculated that Valeria was involved with Santa Muerte and that the spirit of death was surrounding her. People believed that those around her were being used as vessels to carry out the demonic attacks already targeting her life. Many Mexican people pointed out how heartbreaking the situation was, but also how it revealed a deeper spiritual truth. Santa Muerte is not a spirit to be worshipped. The deception surrounding her is real, and sadly, many don't recognize the spiritual consequences until it's too late. People were saying, most wouldn't suspect it, but this world is far more spiritual than what we see with our eyes. What often looks like a coincidence or random tragedy is actually rooted in deep, unseen spiritual warfare. Now back to Valeria's situation. There's been growing speculation surrounding Valeria's situation, particularly the theory that she wanted to distance herself from the narco man she was involved with, something he didn't take lightly. According to him, Valeria was just a regular girl before he came into the picture, and he believed he transformed her into what he saw as an elite Barbie, investing heavily in her cosmetic surgeries, lifestyle, and public image. Because of that, he felt entitled to her success and believed she owed him for her rising popularity. Her salon was also rumored to be a front for money laundering operations, and insiders suggest Valeria may have been deeply involved and knew too much. Adding to the tension, her growing public attention and the gifts she received from multiple admirers reportedly embarrassed him in front of his peers. In cartel culture, women like Valeria, often referred to as buchonas, the girlfriends, wives, or sugar babies of high-ranking members, are seen as property. Her attempts to reclaim her independence may have been perceived not just as betrayal, but as a direct threat to his ego, reputation, and control. If Valeria Marquez wanted to leave a cartel boss, especially someone from the Jalisco New Generation cartel, then her death was likely a spiritual and symbolic punishment for rebellion. As I've mentioned, in the narco world, women tied to high-ranking leaders are often seen as property. Attempting to leave is treated as treason, especially if she knew too much, she had access to secrets, or she had influence that threatened control. The pig plushie, a symbol of betrayal and punishment. In this context, the pig becomes a spiritual insult. Here's how it could be interpreted. The pig, a traitor or disobedient woman, fattened with luxury and then slaughtered when she tried to escape. Spiritually, it's similar to calling someone unclean, greedy, or ungrateful for their place. Giving it right before sacrifice on live stream adds an extra layer: mockery, dehumanization, and ritual humiliation. This was a symbolic execution, carried out in front of millions, meant to send a chilling message. This is what happens when a buchona tries to leave the cartel, especially one who knows too much. Valeria wasn't merely trying to escape a possessive man. She was attempting to walk away from a world where secrets are currency and betrayal is met with blood. Her death, recorded and distributed online, was not just an act of violence, it was a ritual, a sacrifice. In narco-spiritual circles, such public executions are often believed to serve as offerings to Santa Muerte, the folk saint of death revered by many involved in the underworld. And this wasn't done in secret. It was staged, broadcasted, and allowed to go viral for a reason. The more eyes on the sacrifice, the stronger the spiritual power the person behind the offering can generate. This belief system, visibility amplifies potency. By turning Valeria into a spectacle, someone admired, desired, envied, and then destroyed, the man behind her death was not just punishing her. He was making a spiritual transaction. Her popularity, her beauty, and her perceived betrayal made her an ideal offering. And with every share, every replay, and every comment, the ritual's reach expanded, fueling the energy harvested from the act. In this dark spiritual framework, he wasn't just asserting control, he was seeking divine favor from a death deity. Her execution became both a public warning and a supernatural investment. A brutal message dressed in blood and broadcast in pixels. She was mine, she's still mine, and now her energy is fuel for something greater. She's not gone, just redistributed. Money is a form of currency. But from many spiritual and esoteric perspectives, currency is not merely financial, it is also energetic. Every exchange is believed to carry something beyond the physical transaction itself. This is why I believe there is an important distinction between building a family with a husband who lovingly provides within marriage and entering relationships where money itself becomes the primary objective. The sprinkle mindset has spread far beyond the United States. Around the world, many women are now being taught that they can simply receive money, gifts, luxury, and provision without recognizing that every exchange has a cost. Most people assume the cost is only physical intimacy. I don't believe it ends there. Spiritually speaking, I believe money carries the imprint of how it was obtained. If wealth was accumulated through exploitation, violence, fraud, corruption, or other forms of injustice, then according to many spiritual traditions, that transaction does not become spiritually neutral simply because it changes hands. The blessing or the burden attached to it is believed to travel with it. In other words, whatever that money is connected to, you may also become connected to. That is why I believe discernment is so important. A person's profession tells you very little about the true source of their wealth. Someone may be a lawyer, a doctor, an entrepreneur, or a successful investor. That doesn't automatically tell you how they conduct themselves behind closed doors. People have private lives, people have secrets, people make compromises that the public never sees. From my Christian perspective, every financial exchange is also a spiritual exchange. We should never become so blinded by provision that we stop asking where that provision comes from and what it may be attached to. I also believe many powerful people are far more spiritually aware than the average person realizes. Whether through religion, the occult, superstition, or esoteric practices, many understand that actions have spiritual consequences. Within some occult traditions, there is a belief that burdens, consequences, or spiritual liabilities can be transferred through ritual, agreement, offerings, covenants, or exchanges. From my perspective, that makes discernment even more important, because if someone believes they can transfer spiritual burdens through exchanges, and another person willingly enters that exchange without discernment, both people may believe they are participating in something far deeper than a simple financial transaction. This is one reason I believe we continue to see stories like Valeria's and other women who allegedly became involved with powerful men operating in dangerous circles. Whether or not every allegation surrounding those cases is true, the pattern itself should give young women pause. The lesson isn't that money is evil. The lesson is that money is never just money. Every dollar has a story. Every gift has a source. Every relationship has a spiritual direction. The question is not simply, what am I receiving? The question is, what am I becoming connected to? Because not every blessing comes from God, and not every opportunity is meant to be accepted. Also, as I said, but it is worth repeating, you have to understand that many powerful men are far more spiritually aware than people realize. It's 2026. Not everyone at the highest levels of business, politics, or finance views the world through a purely material lens. According to some occult belief systems, one of the central ideas is the transfer of spiritual burdens or karma through offerings, rituals, covenants, and exchanges. The belief is that negative spiritual consequences can be shifted from one person to another through a willing transaction. From that perspective, money is not just money, it becomes the vehicle for that exchange. The idea is that by giving someone money or expensive gifts, a person can symbolically transfer what they believe they are carrying onto the recipient. The recipient willingly accepts the exchange without realizing they may also be accepting a spiritual burden attached to it. Whether someone believes those practices actually work is a matter of faith and worldview, but the important point is that there are people who do believe in them and act accordingly. That is why I keep coming back to discernment. Before accepting someone's provision, ask yourself not only where the money came from, but what that person believes, what they practice, and what they may think they are transferring through the exchange. Because from a spiritual perspective, not every gift is simply a gift. You may think you're outsmarting people in playing the game, while an even more dangerous game is being played on you. One thing worth considering is that organizations and belief systems like Freemasonry have, in my opinion, spread much farther than many people realize. I've already discussed on this channel my views about fraternities and sororities at many prestigious universities, and how I believe they can serve as gateways into other organizations and networks. Many of society's most influential professions are occupied by people with powerful connections: doctors, lawyers, police officers, judges, politicians, business executives, and financiers. Then there are the people operating in the criminal underworld, where occult beliefs and practices have also been widely discussed. And we shouldn't forget ordinary people. The occult is not practiced only by celebrities, politicians, or wealthy elites. Many everyday people participate in various occult and esoteric practices on their own. That is why I believe discernment is so important. When a relationship is built primarily on transactions rather than genuine love, commitment, and shared values, you simply don't know what the other person believes, what circles they move in, or what spiritual practices they may be involved with. From my perspective, a purely transactional relationship creates more opportunities for spiritual compromise, because the relationship itself is based on exchange rather than covenant. You may believe you're only receiving money, gifts, or a luxurious lifestyle. Spiritually, however, you may be entering into an exchange you don't fully understand. That's why I believe young women should stop asking, "What can I get?" and start asking, "What am I becoming connected to?"
If you are really pretty, you need to go for older men who have money. Okay? They feel like they've worked hard all their life and they deserve you. So they're not going to be intimidated by you or try to take you down a notch so that they can feel like some sort of a prize. It's like a car. And it's sad to make the comparison, but it is. It's like buying a very nice vehicle. Get you an old man. They'll pay. Okay? Don't date your own age. Go get your old one. They'll pay. If you're dealing with an older man, you got to remind him of his age. Thank you, Anna Maria. Sprinkle, sprinkle. Remind him of his age when he forgot how old he was. Put him back in his place. These rich old men already know what it is. If they want you to like them, they got to give you something. All right? That's just common sense. Why are you supposed to like a rich old man by yourself? Like, what kind of weirdo is going to go around looking for somebody's grandfather because they like them for real? Zero.
Another thing I see as problematic with Shera's ideology is her promotion of significant age gap relationships. Because she was in one herself, it's understandable that this is the framework she knows best. But if you really listen to how she describes her own marriage, it comes across as highly transactional and, in my opinion, lacking genuine love. I understand that genuine love is rare, but if you're specifically promoting relationships built around large age gaps and financial provision, I believe genuine love becomes even rarer. The reality is that, generally speaking, younger women are not naturally attracted to men several decades older than them. Don't believe me? Take the money away. Would that same man have the same success with much younger women? Probably not. And that leads me to another point that I think people rarely discuss. A much older man who enters into a relationship with a much younger woman often knows exactly why she's there. He knows the money is a major part of the attraction. Imagine what that feels like on a human level. You don't really want me. You want what I can provide. That dynamic is dehumanizing for the woman because she becomes something that can be purchased. But I also think it's deeply degrading for the man because, consciously or subconsciously, he knows the affection may be conditional. In my opinion, that realization can easily breed resentment. He may not genuinely respect her because he views her as someone who is using him. Once mutual respect disappears, the relationship becomes vulnerable to control, manipulation, possessiveness, and emotional abuse. And if the woman eventually decides to leave, that resentment may become even stronger because the man may feel that after everything he provided, she still walked away. Whether that results in attempts to sabotage her, control her, or simply withhold respect, the relationship has already become unhealthy. That's why I don't see this dynamic as a win or a flex. I see it as something deeply sad. A relationship built on mutual use is very different from a relationship built on mutual love.
If you don't like ugly guys, you don't like money. If you don't like old or ugly, you don't like money. Okay, sprinkle, sprinkle. What you like is to be seen next to somebody that might look better than you in about 10 years. That's what y'all like. Okay, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting ready to be with anyone who's gonna look better than me in 10 years.
These older men are not necessarily pursuing you because they genuinely want to give you the world. One of the first questions I would ask is, why you? If a man in his 40s, 50s, 60s, or even 70s consistently seeks out women young enough to be his daughter, that pattern deserves careful discernment. While age gap relationships can vary from couple to couple, a significant imbalance in age, life experience, financial resources, and influence can create conditions where manipulation becomes much easier. A younger woman often has less relationship experience, fewer resources, and may be more easily impressed by status, luxury, or the promise of a better life. From a psychological standpoint, that creates a power imbalance. From a spiritual standpoint, I believe it can create an even greater vulnerability. Throughout this video, I've argued that money is not merely a financial exchange, but can also become a spiritual exchange. When someone builds a relationship primarily on provision, rather than covenant, character, and genuine love, they may unknowingly become connected to the other person's beliefs, values, compromises, and spiritual influences. That is why discernment matters more than appearances. Many wealthy men know exactly what impresses a young woman: a designer handbag, luxury vacations, exclusive restaurants, private jets, a glamorous lifestyle. But those things tell you nothing about the condition of a person's heart. They tell you nothing about what that person does in private, who they associates with, what they believe, or what spiritual doors they may have opened in their own life. If someone is trying to purchase your affection, they may eventually begin to believe they own your affection. You become an investment, an acquisition, something bought rather than cherished. Spiritually, I believe that is a dangerous place to be because God never designed love to operate as a commercial transaction. Ladies, don't be easily impressed by appearances. Just because a man appears successful, educated, powerful, or wealthy does not automatically make him safe. Ask deeper questions. Look for humility. Look for integrity. Look for peace. Look for the fruit of his character. Because the most dangerous people are often not those with the least power. They're the ones with the most power and the least accountability.
Have you ever heard a grown man talk about, well, what do you look for in a woman? I want to find true love. I want the fairy tale princess that I can sweep off her feet and take her away from everything. I want to be Prince Charming. Men will marry a woman so he can have a child with her and she can raise his child. Men will marry a woman because all their families and friends are expecting them to. Men will marry a woman because they're getting older. Men don't marry for the same reason women marry, and they do not hold marriage sacred. That's why women should marry for money, because men do not hold marriage sacred.
Again, I believe Shera is projecting her own reality onto young women. The idea that men don't look for true love simply doesn't match what I've seen in real life. Do some men marry for status, convenience, or appearances? Absolutely. But those aren't healthy men. Those are emotionally unhealthy people, and in some cases they may have serious personality disorders. They are the exception, not the standard I believe women should build their expectations around. What man, in today's economy, is willingly taking on the responsibilities of marriage simply because his family or friends pressured him into it? If anything, I believe women experience far more pressure to marry than men do. The men who marry for purely transactional reasons are exactly the kinds of men women should be trying to avoid. Ironically, if a man believes he can buy access to you, control you, or take advantage of you because of his financial position, you're much more likely to attract the type of relationship Shera describes. I'll use my own marriage because it's the closest example I have. My husband doesn't care whether I cook or clean. We have a cleaning lady. When we're ready for children, he wants us to use a surrogate because he's concerned about my physical recovery and my mental health. He knows I grew up with a narcissistic mother and that I'm still healing from that trauma. He has even talked about getting me cats to keep me company while he's at work because he wants me to feel loved and cared for. That doesn't mean every marriage looks like ours. It simply means that men like this do exist. I also see it outside my own relationship. I've become friends with women at my Pilates studio. I usually go around 2 p.m. to avoid the crowds, and I've met women who are genuinely loved, respected, and willingly provided for by their husbands. Those marriages exist. But first, you have to believe they exist. I'm sharing my experience not to brag. Bragging would be posting my husband, myself, our wedding, our apartment, our lifestyle, and constantly trying to prove something to strangers online. That's bragging. What I'm doing on a faceless channel is simply sharing my experience. And it makes me wonder, why are negative experiences always more welcome than positive ones? Because negativity comforts people who are hurting. It confirms their worldview. I remember commenting under one of Margarita Nazarenko's videos that not all men cheat. I almost got jumped in the comments by women telling me, just wait, you'll find out. Think about that for a second. Instead of hoping I would have a happy marriage, they were hoping I would be betrayed. They were speaking curses over another woman's life. I experienced something similar after I got married. I mentioned it briefly in one of my videos, and almost immediately another YouTuber, who has repeatedly copied my content ideas, went on a posting spree about how marriage isn't a flex, and that men only get married because they reach the age where it's time to marry. I don't believe that. If anything, women are the ones who experience far more social pressure to marry before a certain age. Men can remain single well into their 30s and 40s without society judging them nearly as harshly. Sometimes I think people create theories that allow them to feel better about where they are in life. It's easier to believe that every married woman is secretly miserable than to accept that some women are genuinely loved. The truth is, there are many happily married women. You just don't hear from them very often because many are bullied whenever they speak positively about their marriages. If you say your husband loves you, if you say he provides for you willingly, if you say he treats you with kindness, someone immediately wants to tell you you're lying, you're naive, or that he'll eventually cheat. Why? Because your reality challenges theirs. It threatens a narrative they've spent years building. A narrative that says all men are the same, marriage is a prison, and every wife is secretly suffering while single women are happier and more fulfilled. I simply don't believe that's reality. I believe many quality men are looking for genuine love just as much as many women are. Unfortunately, I also believe some women never meet those men because they've spent years listening to voices that taught them to distrust every man before giving him a chance. Everything is spiritual. The chair you're sitting on was once an idea in someone's mind. The phone you're watching this on existed as a thought before it became reality. Everything begins with a thought. And if you continually fill your mind with the belief that no good men exist, that every husband cheats, that every relationship ends in betrayal, and that genuine love is impossible, don't be surprised if that's exactly what you begin attracting. Your beliefs shape your expectations. Your expectations influence your choices. Your choices shape your life. That is why I believe we have to guard not only our hearts, but also our minds. Because the stories we repeatedly believe eventually become the lives we live. Our minds can become prisons if we allow lies to define what we think is possible. As Proverbs 23:7 says, "As he thinks in his heart, so is he." And in Mark 9:23, Jesus says, "All things are possible to him who believes." I believe many women have accepted a worldview that tells them genuine love is a fantasy. But Romans 12:2 tells us not to be conformed to this world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our minds. Sometimes the greatest prison isn't our circumstances. It's the beliefs we've accepted as truth. When you spend years telling women that men don't want love, don't want companionship, and don't dream about building a family, I think you're stripping men of their humanity. Men are human too. They feel, they cry, they get lonely, they struggle, they want companionship, they want to share their lives with someone. They want someone to come home to, they want someone to build with, they want someone to grow old with, they want someone to love, and not every man, but many do. I think one of the saddest consequences of the sprinkle mindset is that it teaches women to stop believing those men exist. Because if you no longer believe real love is possible, you'll stop looking for it. And when you stop looking for it, you'll settle for transactions instead of covenant. I don't believe that's God's design. I believe God created marriage to reflect love, sacrifice, mutual honor, and commitment, not a negotiation between a buyer and a seller. The world says, find the richest man. God says, guard your heart. The world says, secure the lifestyle. God says, seek first the kingdom. Those are two completely different paths, and only one of them leads to peace.
Someone asking if my husband ever cheated. No, ma'am, he's never cheated me out of any money. Sprinkle, sprinkle. All right, then. Hope that answers your question. I've never been cheated out of any money. People are asking me dumb questions. What will I do if my husband cheat? Nothing. I don't care. Can you act out finding out a man is cheating on you? All right, let me act it out. Let me show you what to do. Because some of y'all be overreacting. Don't say too much. The less you say, the better. Be like, you know what? Come here. Oh, you do me a favor? Like, act like you finna just ask him something. And like, sure, honey. What do you want? Come here. I just want you to do me a favor. I'm so sorry. Are you busy? No? Okay, come here. Then pull up your evidence. Can you read that for me? He's gonna be like, then he's gonna see that he's busted. And then you're gonna be like, then you're gonna scroll to the next screen with your request, whether it's the car, whatever you want him to buy you, some property, some land, whatnot. And then you need to say, you know what, I was looking at this and I think I want to go test drive it. What do you think? Really? Okay, let's go to the dealership. Then we go into the vet. Get your shots, all your medical records, veterinarian records up to date. And, you know, we ain't finna roll around no time soon. Sprinkle, sprinkle. That's what you do. That's how you handle it, baby.
And sadly, I think this reveals who she is. When Shera was asked whether James had cheated, she responded by saying that he had never cheated her out of money. That answer stood out to me. It almost shifts the conversation away from fidelity and onto finances. The implication seems to be that as long as the money is still coming, everything else is secondary. She even reenacted asking for an expensive gift after discovering her husband had cheated, presenting it as some kind of empowering response. But I don't see that as empowerment. He's your husband. He should already be providing for you if that's the arrangement in your marriage. Receiving a luxury gift after infidelity doesn't erase the betrayal. To me, staying with someone after they've cheated simply because they can compensate you financially reflects a complete breakdown of self-respect. What happens then? Does a car erase betrayal? Does a designer bag restore trust? Does a vacation undo humiliation? Cheating is one of the deepest forms of betrayal in a relationship. It destroys trust, violates the covenant of marriage, and humiliates the other person. If money becomes enough to overlook that, then the relationship has become purely transactional, and I believe that is one of the most dangerous messages she teaches. In my opinion, that teaches women to tolerate disrespect as long as they're materially comfortable. That is not empowerment, that is dependency. And dependency can become the doorway to manipulation, emotional abuse, and long-term psychological harm. You only have one life. Respect yourself. Know your worth beyond what someone can buy for you, because no amount of money can purchase back your peace, your dignity, or your self-respect.
Now that Shera Seven's husband has passed away, I would love for her to take her own advice and go into the dating pool to actually see if it works. Because I never understood it. I honestly always wondered, what the hell does a married woman for 20 years know about dating in this day and age, in this digital era? Because 20 years ago was 2006 and Flavor of Love was on. And you cannot be giving me Flavor of Love ass advice, because that's just outdated. So I want to see you go into the dating field and take your advice that people are sending you gifts and doing all of this shit for, and actually apply it, because I don't think that it works. I think she was just saying shit, and she was speaking from a married woman's perspective. Yes, you can ask your married husband for money because he's going to give it. It's your money at the end of the day. But the way you're telling women to approach men, it's not going to work in this day and age, and it hasn't. I mean, somebody show me, bring a person that has actually used Shera Seven's advice and it actually worked. Or I want to see her do it herself, because I never thought, I've always thought this shit didn't work.
Shera has said herself that she will never go back out and date. She gave her own reasons for that. My opinion is different. I believe the real reason is that she has exposed herself. She is an attractive woman, and had she never built an online platform around these ideas, I think she could have found a partner at this stage of her life. But after years of publicly teaching women to approach relationships as transactions, I think dating becomes much more difficult. She knows that if she were to re-enter the dating market, she would get dog-walked by any man who recognized her content and understood her views on relationships, just as we've seen it happen with Wizard Liz. In my opinion, that is the danger of building an identity around money and status. Eventually, the very philosophy that brought you attention can make genuine relationships much harder to build. If you spend years telling the world that your primary interest is provision without love, you shouldn't be surprised if people approach you to exploit you. Trust becomes much harder to establish, and once trust is gone, real love becomes much harder to find. I think now she's going to keep pushing content that encourages women to stay single because that's the reality that now reflects her own life. Just watch.
I think women that have their own money and that have a lot of money, y'all don't even need to get married. Okay, unless you want to, unless that man makes more money than you or is going to 100% provide, period. And if he don't, he's gone. Kick to the curb. We live in a day and age now where women are very successful and they don't really need a husband unless that man is financially beneficial. Listen to what I'm telling y'all. Why? Because if not, what are you signing up for if the man is not financially beneficial? What's he gonna do for you? Think about it. What that man gonna do for you as a husband if he can't give you no money? List it. List all the pros of being married to a man if he's not giving you money. I don't see none.
And I'm not saying your husband shouldn't provide for you, but let me ask you this. Why would a man who makes significantly more money than Shera choose someone with her worldview? She may never say that part out loud, but that's the implication. If you're teaching women that men primarily value youth, beauty, and transaction, then what happens when a younger, more attractive woman comes along? By that logic, there will always be someone else. That's exactly why I believe relationships built primarily on money are such a fragile foundation. In my opinion, women like Shera and Wizard Liz have, in a sense, placed a cross over their own love lives. But you don't have to. That is exactly why I don't think you should blindly follow their philosophy if you don't want your life to resemble theirs. Their trauma is not your trauma. Their disappointments are not your disappointments. Their beliefs do not have to become your beliefs. Don't inherit them. And I'll tell you something that I think is often overlooked. Earlier I said that money is a form of currency, but money isn't the only currency. Attention is currency, time is currency, thought is currency, emotion is currency, energy is currency. Wherever you consistently direct your attention, You begin to form an energetic connection. This is why the people closest to us inevitably influence us. There's a reason people say, "Show me your friends, and I'll show you who you are." Over time, friends often begin dressing alike, speaking alike, adopting similar beliefs, habits, mannerisms, and sometimes even resembling one another. Their energy begins to synchronize. Spiritually, I believe the same principle applies to the people we follow online. You may never meet them, you may never speak to them, but if you spend hours every week consuming their content, emotionally investing in their stories, agreeing with their worldview, repeating their phrases, adopting their beliefs, and defending them online, you are gradually aligning yourself with their energetic and spiritual signature. Whether you call that resonance, agreement, spiritual influence, or impartation, the principle is the same. Repeated attention creates alignment, and alignment eventually produces resemblance. That is why Scripture repeatedly tells us to guard our hearts and renew our minds, because what repeatedly enters your mind eventually begins to shape your identity. If someone constantly teaches distrust, cynicism, fear, transactional relationships, and emotional detachment, and you continually immerse yourself in that message, don't be surprised if those same qualities slowly begin appearing in your own life. You begin to see relationships through their wounds. You begin to interpret people through their trauma. You begin carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. From my perspective, this is one of the enemy's most subtle strategies. He doesn't always need to attack you directly. Sometimes he simply introduces you to someone whose worldview slowly becomes your own. Before you know it, you're rejecting genuine love before you've even experienced it. You're distrusting people who have never hurt you. You're expecting betrayal before commitment. You're preparing for heartbreak before you've even fallen in love. That is an energetic transfer. That is a spiritual transfer. And eventually, it becomes an identity transfer. So be very careful who you allow to disciple your mind. Because everyone you consistently listen to is teaching you far more than information. They're teaching you how to see the world. And if their worldview was born out of trauma, bitterness, or disappointment, you may eventually inherit those same lenses without ever experiencing the events that created them. Their trauma does not have to become your testimony. Choose carefully whose spirit, whose mindset, and whose worldview you allow to shape your own.
So a few people in my comments have asked me to talk about the sprinkle lady. Here are my thoughts. I had no idea who this woman was. I promise you. She had never come across my radar, so I had to do some research. And what I found was disappointing. After watching 10 or 15 minutes worth of her clips, I was able to notice that the entire theme, the discourse of her channel, is to reduce the function of a man to that of personal gain. Completely removing the effort and the intimacy of a relationship and making it strictly transactional. And in my opinion, the reason why women seem to be eating that up is because it gives them a false sense of empowerment. The reason I say that is because any woman who is in a happy and healthy marriage will tell you that threatening to get rid of a man at a moment's notice just because he's not of use to you is not empowering. Because in a relationship, if both of you are not empowered, neither of you are. We can call that something else, certainly not a relationship. In relationships, there has to be a certain level of effort, of intimacy, of servitude present from both ends for it to work. And if you remove those elements, you're going to have a relationship that's filled with abuse and neglect. Something that you don't want. Now, far be it from me from telling you what to do. However, my sincere advice is to not listen to this lady because she is setting a lot of you up for failure. She is teaching you how to demand, but never how to offer. And that right there is a kryptonite for any relationship. Alright, so I was going to leave this alone. I really was. But there are a lot of comments like this resurfacing on my videos that I made 3 months ago. And I feel like there's a teachable moment here. So, for context, a few months ago I made a video. You can click on this comment to see the video. I advise women not to approach men, their husbands, potential lovers, anything with dollar signs in their eyes, not to see them as human bank accounts. That's all. And then I added, do not be surprised if men see you only for your body if you decide to play that game. For whatever reason, my sentiments equal me being broke, according to many women in that comment section. And here's a teachable moment because right now I'm at work, working joyfully for my wife, who's at home, not having to pay any bills. My question for those of you calling me broke is, can you say the same? Because apparently your system isn't working. Because the way I see it right now, she's the one that's winning. We both are really. She's chilling at home, waiting for a man who loves her. And I'm going home to a woman who loves me. And sure, maybe you sprinklers can convince men to buy you the nicest things, to fly you out to wherever you want to go. I bet you don't have his last name though. which means that he can and will get rid of you as soon as he finds someone more attractive than you. Because I bet that you haven't considered that what you do to get someone is what you're going to have to do to keep that person. And beauty is a hard thing to keep up with. Which brings me back to my original point as to why you should not play that game to begin with. It's not possible to win. Now go ahead and clock back in. Your break is over.
I'm going to say this as plainly as I can. Shera 7 is not a role model. And I know some of y'all are about to be mad, but I don't care. I care more about the truth in your souls than I do about your feelings. She has made an entire platform from convincing women that the highest form of female empowerment is transactional relationships. Get what you can from a man financially and then worry about nothing else. And the problem is, we've got a whole generation of women that are now starting to believe that that's what winning looks like. That's not winning. That's emptiness. Some of you honestly believe that as long as the money's coming in, you know, the lies, the cheating, the disrespect, and it's all good as long as we get to cash that check. And then you don't even realize the damage that this is doing to your heart, your self-worth, and your ability to even recognize healthy love if it showed up. And Shera herself was a side chick who got her man by any means necessary and is now teaching all these women to follow that same blueprint. She loves to brag about not caring what a man does as long as he pays. But here's the problem. She's selling you a shortcut to comfort that comes at a very high interest rate. And the debt isn't financial, it's spiritual. Some of you think you're building an empire, but the truth is you're building a sandcastle at high tide. And here's the part that breaks my heart. Some of you honestly believe that you're empowered because you've been taught that selling access to yourself is the highest pinnacle of womanhood. Babe, that's not power. That's poverty in your soul. Don't you understand that you can gain the whole world, but if you lose your soul in the process, you've lost everything. When the money dries up, when the beauty fades, when the attention moves to someone younger and shinier, what will you have left? Shera really got y'all out here thinking you're securing a bag, but all you're really securing is an early expiration date on your peace, on your integrity, and on your future. So sprinkle that on your spirit. And while you're at it, get you some wisdom before all this foolishness destroys you so bad that you won't be able to come back from it.